Hello dear viewers, thank you for choosing the Manhwa compilation channel. Please leave feedback in the comments after watching. Enjoy watching. A war has come into the world that a person could never even think about. It was a fight between humans and dragons from a completely different dimension. It is she who will decide the fate of humanity. It was impossible for the common man to understand how important this battle was. The enemy army was represented by gifted and strong creatures. At the head of the attackers is a monster that has appeared on Earth from another dimension. People face a difficult struggle for their lives and lands. The monster who, having placed himself at the head of the invaders before humanity, was the dragon. It was he who led many monsters. Just the sight of these terrible creatures took people's breath away. But at the same time, people with abilities began to appear among the inhabitants of the Earth, who are called superhumans. An unknown number of these warriors died fighting. It seemed to many that the victory of humanity would be soon. The war lasted for 3 whole years. Unfortunately, everything did not happen as people wanted. Even though the battles are over, no matter what, the monster will return. In 15 years, the dragons will make themselves known again. This was the oracle's prophecy. Above the people, an institution was created for the development of spheres of abilities, which were called ARC. Children with innate superpowers fell into this company and prepared these unusual people for the final battle with the enemy. Every year, people had less and less time to prepare. One of these guys who had to resist the dragon army was our main character. The military uniform of people in which they fought with dragons was very different from the usual uniform. The suits of these army men were made from special metal and looked like robots. Huge metal helmets and weapons were like in computer games. In appearance, one could say that they were impenetrable. Only the dragon, which used its magical powers, was equally affected by the enemy's clothing and weapons. The army of monsters seemed invincible to humans. The warrior, looking only at his opponent, already understood all his power, and fear could be read in his eyes. People's firearms gave hope that the enemy could be defeated with them. This was the case with ordinary low-rank monsters. They died. The explosions destroyed some low-ranking invaders, but to kill them all, they were very weak for that. At first, the man rejoiced at his small victory. Soon his look changed from joyful to frightened. The warrior was illuminated by a blue and bright light that emitted extreme pressure. A few seconds later, a dragon appeared, flying straight towards him. The sight of the monster was very terrifying even for the fighter who was being prepared for battle. If an ordinary person saw him, then at that very second his heart would not be able to withstand such horror. The warrior who confronted him was no exception. The power possessed by the leader of the attackers disarmed the man. Unable to resist the monster, panic gripped the employee. From the small force that the dragon used, the man who wanted to resist him immediately plunged into flames. The protective uniform burned out in a matter of minutes, and the fire switched to the body of the young man. The blonde opened his eyes in a cold sweat from what he had just seen. Sitting down at the table, the military man thought that he had a nightmare again. This was not the first dream for him. He dreamed about them from time to time, and did not represent anything good. The young man remembered what day he had today. On this day, the last conscripts arrived for service in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. Our main character, Lehan, who was one of these newcomers, was already sitting on the plane. The guy was the leader of a gang of orphan saboteurs, homeless kids like him. Despite the fact that he led a gang, he was only 10 years old. The man who stood in uniform opposite our main character reminded him that he was not in prison yet, so he should not be afraid. The employee asked if the child knew or had heard anything about the RK facility. The sudden question surprised Lehan a little, as he had heard that this company was aimed at developing beyond human abilities. He even had the idea that he might be a Superman. The man confirmed that the child turned out to be smart. The old man even said more, that the main character is not just a Superman, but should become the future savior of humanity. From today, the little one begins a new, well-fed life, in which he will have a home and a bed. The officer's words offended our character since this proposal was only for him. His brothers remained orphans and without a home. The only condition that Lehan could agree to in order to go to the ARC was that the man standing in front of him would take responsibility for his friends. The old man would worry about the guys, that they were fed up, they had a place to sleep, about their education and everything friend associated with them. The man was seriously surprised by the request he heard. The employee understood what the boy was asking him for, and he agreed. From this day on, the military will take responsibility for the brothers for whom Lehan was previously responsible. He will become their guardian. Only the old man had a counter condition that the child could not refuse. Their contract is valid for exactly the time that the main character is in the institution. Our character understood what his opponent wanted to tell him. They both agreed to such a contract. Now the orphan truly began a new life. Upon entering the plane, our character was on his way to a completely different life. The boy went to his destination. He already understood that everything would change for him, but he could not even imagine how much. Standing at the exit from the plane, the child looked around. Lehan remembered what the old man told him, that superpowers are divided into ranks. Our character's rank was not high. but this still gave him the opportunity to join and reveal himself in the institution. The boy received an order to do everything in order to survive in this place, if the fate of his brothers is really important to him. In front of the entrance door to the Ark, the child once again remembered the words of his mentor. He had no way back. At any cost, he must hold out in this place and become one of the best people with superpowers. The fate of his friends depends on him. Suddenly, he heard the screams of those who were arriving like him. Turning back, the guy saw the kids clashing. In this crowd, a small man was kicked out and ordered to return home. The center of attention was an angry boy who shouted to the boy that if he was brought here, he should not cry. At that time, the offended man was on his knees and crying. The golden-haired man did not let up. He accused that because of crybabies like this child, all conscripts are looked at as non-entities. The blonde was not stingy with insults. He continued to throw more and more dirt at the guy. The guys from the crowd made up their minds and started asking who he was and why he was better than them. The golden-haired man became angry and his eyes began to glow. He no longer held back his superpower and decided to show everyone how strong he was. Because he had innate data that was not achievable for most of the newcomers present. The blonde began to brag about how he was an experienced user of superpowers. With his strength, he was able to hold the stone in the air above his hand. This power shocked the watching guys. They had never seen a real Superman in action before. Holding the stone in front of him, the golden-haired man began to talk about the fact that he became interested in what would happen to this boy after he injures him. The victim would be sent home immediately, and decided that it was better for him to leave now than not survive after several days of training. Admiring his strength, the blonde decided that this was not enough. The boy still has to thank him for what he does. With enormous force, the arrogant man sent the stone towards his target. The object flew straight towards the conscript. Our hero could not allow anyone to be bullied. Lehan stood up for the boy and stopped the flying object. The main character also objected that the power of flight is surprisingly slow. He believed that he would have flown faster if he had thrown it with his hand. This made the blonde very angry. He asked who he was. Our character didn't introduce himself. He just said that he would be a teacher of his good manners. A fight broke out between this couple, which everyone watched with interest. An instructor was approaching the crowd of rogues, who was supposed to familiarize them with further actions. Coming closer, the military man shouted for everyone to disperse. Hearing the adult's voice, everyone watching made way for him, and he persistently approached the couple who were fighting. The man turned to the perpetrators of the battle. He was even interested to see who these madmen were. The clerk ordered the brawl-loving pair to stand still. The instructor ordered them to say their names and introduce themselves. The arrogant man's name was Del Simon. His name was already well known. The man knew that this guy had already completed training, and he was wondering what superpower had already manifested itself. Simon replied that he has telekinesis. Lehan looked at him in surprise. The teacher did not like this, and he decided to test his student by attacking him with a blow. Del flew back screaming. He did not expect the attack in such an attitude. Stopping, the instructor was angry because he did not expect that his student, who had only one ability awakened, turned his nose up so much. This was very bad for him. The employee called the boy Oklaman. The next person the military man turned to was Lehan. The man approved of his tendency to help people who are weaker than them. Only the fact that our character's ability is even lower than Del's makes him an even bigger idiot. With these words, he also hit our hero. The instructor continued that the school year would start in 3 weeks. If by that time someone does not show any superpowers, then he will be expelled. Lehan cleared his throat from the blow inflicted by the instructor. The teacher introduced himself. His name was John Red. He was their instructor, and during the training period, he will do everything to ensure that these recruits from Biotrash are transformed into fighting superhumans and are able to defeat the Dragon Army. Now they will begin training. The first task was to run around the stadium without stopping. Stopping will only be possible when the instructor says so. The teacher ordered to start jogging. She will decide who is ready to learn and who is not. The conscripts began to run. For stopping, they were threatened with expulsion. Our character was accustomed to such a challenge. Running was not a difficult challenge for him. Some students gave up as soon as they started running. They fell to the ground and refused to continue. The instructor immediately saw that one of the guys stopped and sent them home. Hearing how others were expelled in a matter of minutes, Lehan thought about how he was used to physical work. The main character only cared about his superpower. Will he be able to reveal it like his classmate? Our character was worried about whether she was in it or not. The guy Del Simon ran with all his strength. Physical labor was very difficult for him. Few could withstand it. Drops of sweat flowed down his face. They looked like a stream. Unable to withstand the test, the guy fell off his feet. The instructor was standing right in front of him. The man called the conscript a bastard. It's time for the guy to go home, and there he can sleep and relax. The child began to mutter something under his breath. The teacher didn't like this very much. It was hard to hear that he would no longer be able to run, The instructor looked at the boy with a withering gaze. Lehan ran up to the boy and began to lift him up. The hero told the teacher that this student did not say that he gave up. Our character looked at the boy with a smile and made it clear that he would not leave him alone. The child understood and accepted the help of his classmate. He needed her now. John looked at his comrades. He liked the conscript's action. Lehan took his classmate by the arms and ran with him. The instructor observed their behavior. Evening was approaching. The sky was filled with red gloom. The teacher ordered the conscripts to stop. It was already possible to draw conclusions. Our character fell to the ground exhausted. It's very difficult to run and even help another. Looking at the remaining students who were sitting or lying in the stadium, the instructor said that out of 73 applicants, only 40 remained. John Red said that this run was just a warm-up that they would do every morning, and the real training starts tomorrow. What they heard made the conscripts feel even worse than before. Our character was not very surprised by what he heard. He suspected what was waiting for him here. The next day, training began in the ARC, which could not be missed. According to the schedule, the run began at 5 in the morning, and it was mandatory. At 8, they had breakfast in the dining room, where the entire course ate. Classes started promptly at 9. At the first lecture, the instructor explained that the children needed to find the source of their superpowers with their inner gaze. For this, the most important thing is to concentrate. This source may be in the head, or in the heart, or in the lower chakra. To awaken it, you need to catch the image. The main character decided to look for his source in the heart. There was afternoon tea at 12:30. Passing the dining room, Lehan looked around to see where he could join the table. He saw the guy he helped at the stadium. That kid's name was Kuro. Our character came to him and sat down at the table. This guy was the first person the leader of the orphan saboteurs became friends with in this institution, and indeed in life in general. Lehan wished his comrade a bon appetit and proceeded to dinner himself. Del Simon was walking past them at the time. The main character noticed him. The blonde stared at the orphan all the time. Our character also looked at the enemy without taking his eyes off. Kuro said that he heard about this golden-haired man. He took a course for gifted children in the UK. The main character was infuriated by the fact that this blonde had his abilities discovered before anyone else. Lehan really hoped that they would also be able to learn telekinesis during their 3 weeks in the ARC. Kuro shared that he actually already knows how to master this ability. Our character was happy for his friend. He turned out to be not the simple guy he seemed to be. Next on the schedule were evening classes, combat practice, and an evening jog. Afterwards, there was a shower, dinner, roll call, and lights out, which everyone was really looking forward to. When everyone went to bed, Lehan thought that he could not sleep because he was worried about his brothers. He now had everything: a shower, food, a pillow, and a blanket. Our boy has never had such excellent living conditions before. The main character really wanted to go home, but he couldn't give up so quickly. For the sake of your named family, you need to hold out in this institution as long as possible. The thought that he should not be a weakling gave him strength for further existence. 2 weeks of hard training passed. Many of the conscripts awakened their telekinesis abilities. During all this time, Lehan, unfortunately, could not find them. The main character had thoughts that he did not have any superpowers. Kuro said that maybe theory would help, but the friend could not explain how telekinesis works for him. Friends knew only one person who knew the theory. This guy was Del Simon. The blonde saw Lehan approaching him and asked what he needed from him. Our character approached his classmate, no matter how difficult it was for him to do so. Looking at the main character, the arrogant man laughed. He knew that our boy needed to learn the theory of telekinesis from him. Del smiled sarcastically that if he wanted to gain knowledge from him, he should at least bow first. He also added that I used to think that in their country they teach good manners from childhood. This made Lehan very angry, but his pride had nothing to do with it now. He should ask this scoundrel for help and stay in school. Unexpectedly for everyone, the orphan knelt in front of Del Simon. Sitting on his knees, the main character asked his enemy to teach him telekinesis. Simon looked at our character with his nose in the air. The blonde thought about the request. This even began to amuse him. Del said that he would teach Lehan how to use telekinesis. All he had to do was stand up. Taking a pencil from his comrade, the golden-haired man attacked the leader of the orphan saboteurs. The main character did not expect such an act from his classmate. ARC organization military planes were flying in the sky. John Red smoked, looking out the window at the area. The instructor was thinking about how quickly the day of enrollment arrived. Time flew by quickly. A bald, round man in a white coat walked into the teacher's office. Octo said he knew that this was where he would find John. The bald man took a breath and told the sergeant that he couldn't smoke in the office. Sitting on a chair, the guest shared that he had come to them to watch the enrollment ceremony. He wondered who the newcomers were this year. The sergeant was not happy with the recruits. To him, they were like a bunch of cannon fodder. Still, John Red said that there are a couple of new guys in this group who are worthy of their attention. One of them is Del Simon. Although he has a bad character, his skills are excellent, even ahead of the ARC program. Okoto heard about the blonde that he graduated from the royal school for training people with superpowers. In some ways, they were similar. Baldy expected a lot from this kid. The instructor began talking about a second student who caught his attention. It was Lehan. The guy had an altruistic type and more strength compared to others. To the teacher, the orphan was a brilliant little warrior. Only their institution needs not ordinary people, but superhumans. And there was no certainty that our character had discovered abilities. The sergeant thought that if Lehan did not have the ability, then with all his training, he did not belong here. Baldy asked what the name of this boy was, who the soldier liked so much. But he didn't let his question be answered, but changed the topic to the fact that when he went up to John's office, he heard the students calling him behind his back. This was not new for the instructor. He guessed what nickname he could have. The man in the robe confirmed that the teacher thinks correctly, and in fact it is so. John Red conducted an assembly of all students at the stadium. He will conduct selections for enrollment in the first year of training. Only those who were able to awaken their superpower and will be able to use it in battle will be enrolled. Kuro looked at Lehan. He was worried that the orphan would not be able to show his strength and would have to go home. To enter, the guys had to show an external effect. It is manifested by the glow of the eyes. If someone has not yet learned telekinesis, it doesn't matter now. Everyone who can make an external effect will be enrolled. Everyone who can show their superpower will stand before the engineer. Those who fail to awaken a flock of agents in black, and these workers will then send the children home. Our character could not allow the second option. Looking at the men in the suit, the orphan saboteur saw among them also Major Khan, the man who sent him here. All the students began to disperse in two directions. The main character stood still for some time and did not move. Kuro looked at his friend and reproached himself for not being able to help him. Our character stood there, not budging, but just started holding his heart. He remembered how a week ago Del Simon had stabbed him in the heart with a pencil. Despite how painful it was, Lehan resisted. Del simply stood and watched as his opponent fell to his knees in front of him from his own blow. There was blood on the t-shirt. The guy's body was pierced. Was this really the way to learn? Our character shouted that Simon wanted to kill him this way, not teach him. The wound was not deep. The blonde said the main thing now is to focus on the pain that comes from within. The wound that the golden-haired one did was a channel of Lehan's power, and now I had to learn how to control it. The main task of the main character now was to extract energy through damage. Del warned that this could not be achieved without injury. Even if Khan stood and held his chest for several days, nothing would happen. The main character guessed that his malicious rival knew that his power was stored in his heart, so he did so. From that day on, our character began to feel his inner energy, which he could not control. But the orphan didn't know what to do so that she could come out now for enrollment. John Red shouted to Lehan. This brought the guy to his senses. The sergeant was tired of waiting. Only one student did not choose his formation. The main character understood that he now had to make sure that his energy was activated. There is no turning back for him. The lives and future of his brothers are at stake. Looking at the student, one of the sergeant's eyes began to glow brightly. The instructor was filled with anger. All those who entered were waiting to see which rank the last student would join. The teacher looked just as angrily at the student who stood still and held his heart. John said that a soldier should always obey the orders of his superior. There can be no exceptions. Red swung at the boy to strike. Lehan knew that he had to act now. It was necessary to figure out how to act correctly in this situation. Our character carefully examined the mentor. The main character's attention was drawn to the pen that was in the instructor's outer pocket. This item was what he needed now, and it was the one that would save him. Lehan was able to pull out the pen from the teacher's pocket. But still, John struck the student. The guy fell to the ground. The main character, looking at the pen in his hand, understood that he still couldn't think of anything better, so he would now act according to the situation. Rising to his feet in front of the instructor, our character raised his hand, clutching a sharp object. He thought that his channel of power was probably still poorly opened, and therefore he needed to make it bigger. John Red looked at his student in fear. The teacher didn't know what to expect from this guy. Lehan believed that the only way to open the channel was to stab himself in the heart, where there was already a wound, so he did. Kuro and Del Simon were scared when they saw what their classmate did. The sergeant quickly grabbed his student and shouted at him, asking the question that he was tired of living. What was happening to him? Blood fell in drops onto the ground, onto which the pen that our character had just released also fell. The eyes of the leader of the bandy of orphan saboteurs shone bright blue. The teacher looked at the guy and realized what he wanted to do this way, and he managed to get his energy out. Lehan was able to make an external effect. The instructor, after seeing the strength of his student, released the orphan. Turning away, John Red moved away from our character. In addition, he said that he had never encountered such mediocrity in his service. Having moved a few meters away, the sergeant stopped. Turning his head, the soldier looked again at the main character and said words that Lehan definitely did not expect to hear. That after all, the guy deserved at least congratulations. Our character sat there with shining eyes. The boy looked at his mentor incomprehensibly. After a few seconds, Lehan realized that he had been accepted into the ARC. And now his journey in this institution is just beginning. Kuro rushed to his friend. He was worried about the main character. Our boy reassured his classmate by saying that everything was fine with him. The wound was not deep and would heal. Octo congratulated Lehan on his acceptance and handed him a gift that he had prepared especially for him. The main character has a watch on his hand. The guy asked what it was. It was a new gadget developed by the engineer himself. This was not just a bracelet for an entire device. Raising his hand, our character saw that verification had begun, and a small copy of himself had grown from the clock in front of him. What he saw seemed incredible. Baldy offered to show how his invention works. John Red shouted for the company to form up. Now, he will divide the conscripts, who have already become students, into classes. The instructor ordered that when the guys heard their rank, they would each stand in a separate row. The grading system at the ARC institution was A, B, C, D. A student's grade is determined by how he performed over the past 3 weeks. Boys should not forget that merit and hard work on their abilities can also increase their rank. The instructor congratulated the 25 recruiters for joining the institution. He also clarified that if they consider him the son of a demon, then they gave him the wrong nickname. Octo thought to himself how vindictive John is, because a few minutes ago they were talking about this alone. Red said that he is not just the son of a demon. He's the most evil one they will ever meet in their lives. Next, the instructor began to announce lists of who was in which class. Only Del Simon was in Group A. There were 4 recruiters in Group B, one of whom was Kuro. These 5 were taken by John and Octo. Next, they will deal with the best students. There were 5 people in Class C, and in Class D, the remaining 15. Our character ended up in Group D. Looking at his friend, Lehan thought that he would still raise his rank, no matter how difficult it was for him. Wei's command, Chenya. Teacher Wei was a very huge man in appearance. He was larger than John Red. Looking at the new instructor, the students were scared. To them, he looked worse than the sergeant. Wei Chen smiled welcomingly at his recruits and introduced himself. He was a weapons instructor. The teacher immediately warned that it would not be easy, but if they tried together, they would succeed. The students realized that they had found a kind and good instructor, but he was just so scary in appearance. The first 5 headed to their class to study. Del Simon approached Lehan and peered at him intently. They passed each other without saying a word. The main character looked in front of him with concentration. Kuro walked towards him with tears in his eyes. It was clear that it was difficult for the guy to adapt to such a life. The boy thought that everything would be fine and he would cope with everything. The leader of a gang of orphans told his friend that he would soon be in class with him. The words he heard encouraged the boy, and he joyfully ran to his lessons. Wei Chen ordered his students to quickly head to the gym. All students headed to campus to continue the exercises. The instructor in the hall showed how to properly use weapons. His skill with a spear was at the highest professional level. The students watched the teacher's skills in fascination. Wei Chen demonstrated hand-to-hand combat and sword fighting. Lehan watched without taking his eyes off his mentor. The instructor guessed that the guys didn't understand why they would need to know how to handle spears and swords if they were going to fight a dragon. Their main task is to learn how to wield energy weapons. Unfortunately, in the human world there is no such matter that could retain a mental charge of energy. Only the skin and bones of a dragon can do this. Therefore, only weapons created from dragon bones can injure them. Lehan asked how then people killed the dragon if they did not have such weapons. Wei Chen remembered what happened in the first battle. The instructor said that in that battle, superhumans fought only hand-to-hand. One dragon killed 100 warriors. Some warriors directed their forces at their opponents from a distance, but he could only be killed at close range. The main task then was to deliver a fatal blow with the right weapon and release the enemy's energy. This task was carried out by strikers. This was the first time the students had heard about such soldiers. They were interested in learning more about them. The teacher asked the students to choose a weapon with which they would control. Lehan took the spear and looked at the weapon in fascination. The instructor asked the main character why he liked the spear. Our character explained that when the mentor demonstrated the weapon, he liked its speed and whistle. Wei Chong saw how this orphan skillfully attacked Sergeant Red with calculation and force. It was impossible not to notice this. It was clear from the child that he grew up in very harsh conditions. The instructor felt sorry for the boy because he had experience in fighting at such a young age. The mentor asked the leader of the gang of orphans to try. He really hopes and counts on him. And for this child to succeed, the teacher will help him in everything. The main character held the spear tightly in his hands. He could not let anyone down. 2 weeks of hard training passed, which took place day after day without interruption. All the guys tried hard and learned how to handle weapons. Our character asked his opponent in battle if it was time for him to surrender. Jose laughed and replied that no. It was clear from Khan that he was saving his strength and was not eager to fight. To make sure of his words, the classmate pointed a spear directly at the main character's face. After parrying his partner's blow, the impressive battle between the students continued. None of the guys wanted to give in and fought until the last. Nevertheless, Lehan disarmed his opponent and knocked the spear out of his hands. Our character won this fight, and this was no longer news to everyone. His opponent was the class president, Jose. The guy was not a weak one. Finally, Lehan was able to become the strongest in the class. The headman was transferred to Class C, so his place was free. Jose believed that the main character should become his successor. Our character was pleased to hear this, but it was not in their capabilities to resolve such issues. Classmates were also in favor of having Lehan as their prefect. The main character thanked his classmates for their trust. Our character understood that if he became a headman, he would be one step away from promotion. Sergeant Red was too angry and not happy. He radiated fire all over. You couldn't approach him, otherwise he'd be burned alive. Looking at the boy, he shouted that no. For some reason, this already seemed familiar to him. In the training room, they were discussing how many people had gotten it from Sergeant Red in the past. The instructor at the stadium fought with Lehan in front of everyone for the student to become class president. The teacher lit a cigar with his superpowers, which made it clear to the students that they could not defeat him. The senior students shouted and supported the first grader in this fight. They sincerely wanted him to teach the instructor a lesson, from whom many had suffered. The sergeant heard everything his students said. The main character's eyes glowed brightly with anger. He was determined to win. John Red was surprised that this particular guy wanted to be a prefect. After all, he can't even master telekinesis. The sergeant lined up all the students of Class D in front of him. The instructor was waiting for explanations from the students why he should make our character the headman. The main character did not know what to answer and what others would answer to the mentor's question. The teacher took out a stick and immediately broke it by force, making one end sharp. John Red threw a stick at the main character to test his reaction. The guy immediately caught her. The instructor was informed that this leader of a gang of orphan saboteurs was the best in spear fighting in the class. Therefore, he must now fight the elder. John Red continued, "What if Khan thinks he can hurt him with a sharp object with such poor superpower skills?" The instructor stood in the middle of the stadium opposite his student, thus allowing him to show his strength. The teacher was unarmed. The student wondered whether the mentor would really fight him hand-to-hand without a weapon. The sergeant said he didn't need a weapon to fight a child. The rules of battle are simple. If any part of the instructor's body touches the ground, then the boy wins. For Lehan, the only loss would be when he gives up. Having heard such rules, the main character realized that with such conditions, he would definitely not lose. Our character picked up a stick and began to control it. The sergeant took a stance and concentrated on fighting the child. Boys from parallel classes were talking about how a classmate would actually fight with the instructor. Despite the fact that the guy has good training, it is still not enough to defeat the teacher. Del Simon demanded that he be given the way, as he was also interested in seeing if the rumors were true. The blonde, having pushed all the students aside, began to look at the battlefield with interest. To him, our character seemed crazy. Lehan rushed into battle and attacked the instructor. The teacher repulsed the attacker's first attack. She was easy for him. Each of the opponents did an excellent job with the first attacks. The main character did not stop. He continued to attack his teacher. John Red grabbed the guy and lifted him above him. At that moment, he seemed like a giant, for whom it was not a child, but a small animal. The instructor delivered the next strong blow to his student. With his strength, he knocked the child to the ground. Not every adult could resist this. Having made a few more kicks, the instructor threw the boy further away from him. After this, Lehan did not give up on the stupa. He rose with renewed vigor and took an attack stance. From such a fight, the main character thought that the instructor really wanted to kill him. The sergeant said that the Dragon Army will kill everyone during the war and will not spare anyone. There will be no concessions for anyone in battle, even if they know that the opponent is weak. The sergeant noticed that if his student had encountered an enemy army in his life, this situation would have seemed insignificant to him. While John Red was chatting, the main character rose to his feet and asked straight to his face whether the instructor would continue to fight or chat with him. Seeing that the student had recovered from the previous blow, the teacher again rushed at his subordinate. Grabbing Lehan by the clothes and lifting him up to his height, the sergeant gazed at the student. The instructor made a strong swing with the hand he was holding his student. After this, the sergeant abandoned the child like some homeless kitten. Lehan flew away from the enemy several meters. To the surprise of many, even after such a throw, the guy did not give up. He tried to get up again. The mentor noticed a deep scratch on his cheek. Classmates supported the main character and shouted for him to quickly defeat their instructor. Our character again rushed at the enemy with renewed vigor. John Red realized that this boy was not so simple. He needed to take a closer look at the child's movements. After all, last time he managed to injure the teacher unnoticed. The orphan ran around the instructor and he all the time intently watched every step of the boy. Dodging the boy's attack, the teacher continued to monitor his 7 actions. Each attack was delivered with new and enormous force. John Red realized that this child was agile thanks to his good control of the centrifugal force of the body. Now the sergeant realized that it was not in vain that Wei Chen praised this fellow so much. After this fight, the teacher liked this child. After analyzing how Lehan would attack Red, the instructor decided to meet his next blow. Having attacked the sergeant, our character broke his spear, but managed to inflict injury again. The teacher grabbed the tip of the weapon that was sliding along his wound, holding the stake in his hand that he had just been wounded with. His appearance was terrifying. Angrily, the mentor grabbed his student by the neck. John Red thought that it might be better to kill this child now. He will still be killed in the first fight without superpowers. Looking into the orphan's eyes, the instructor ordered him to give up. The teacher's superpower has come to the fore. From the hand of which he held the leader of the gang of saboteurs, fire came out. The child screamed in pain, but did not give up. The other students looked at the fight and thought that they were both crazy, that they were not inferior to each other. The sergeant was serious. He was ready to kill the child if he did not accept defeat. The main character shouted that he did not admit his loss. It was better to die than to lose in this battle. Wei Chen made his way towards the fighters through the crowd of people watching. Instructor Wei called out to Sergeant Red to stop. The man quickly ran, trying to save that child before he was killed by his colleague. The sergeant noticed that neither the fellow gave up nor knocked him down. But now this child was unconscious. Wei Chen took Lehan in his arms and asked how the fight between them ended. The good-natured man looked at the child lying in his arms and said how tired he was of the educational methods of the ARC institution. John Red stood and looked at his opponent with pride. He was pleased with this child. Suddenly the sergeant screamed. He ordered everyone to be silent. If this guy never admitted that he was giving up, then the instructor will count it as a victory. Looking at Instructor Chen, who was carrying Lehan away, Teacher Red told his colleague to stop coddling with that child. Del Simon watched what was happening in bewilderment. He did not think that his classmate was so resilient and able to overcome such difficulties. Jose also watched the fight. He understood that this guy had proven that he was worth something and could do more than those who had discovered their superpowers. John Red added that when Lehan is cured, he should immediately go to Class B. Several days have already passed. All this time, the main character was in the hospital at the ARC. Lehan was already on the mend. He was getting better every day. The doctor was surprised when she heard that the guy would be transferred straight to Class B. She wondered if it was possible to move through the classroom like that. After all, the sergeant himself just announced that he is submitting lists for transfer and will include the main character there. The instructor noticed that in fact he was ready to transfer the boy to Class A. The only thing stopping the teacher was that he had poor energy potential. Unfortunately, the ARC leadership is looking at superpower. The sergeant noticed that his superiors did not understand anything about this. Red knew that when the time came to fight the dragon, no amount of magic or energy would help. Warriors will need a steely will and courage that will help them hold their weapons and not be afraid, but also strike their opponents. It is in this situation that our character has every chance of becoming the best striker who has ever been raised in an institution. The workers could not afford to miss such a soldier. The sergeant even said that perhaps it was this child who was destined to save all their lives. These words perplexed the doctor. The girl used to think that the instructor did not like this orphan, but now everything seems to be the opposite. The teacher confirmed that this is not so. He likes Lehan, and he sees a real warrior in him. Lehan was on his 7th day of sick leave. The time of rest was coming to an end. The doctor, approaching the room, asked Instructor Wei whether he was going to enter or not. Standing in front of the door, as if caught red-handed after some crime, was Wei Chen, who had brought food and came to visit his student. In his hands was a basket of food that he had brought for lunch. Looking at the instructor, the doctor said that let him pass and not stand in the corridor. Wei Chen leaned over and showed the woman what the victim was doing in the ward. The man felt that now was not the right time to visit. The girl looked through the window and saw Lehan practicing his superpower. The main character worked hard on his telekinesis. His eyes glowed with energy that was able to lift the ball from the table and keep it in the air. Instructor Wei and the doctor watched and quietly cheered for Lehan to succeed. Our character was able to lift the ball and keep it in the air for some time. The doctor and teacher were happy that everything worked out for the child. Wei Chen noticed that the baby had excellent concentration. The instructor entered the room where the orphan was still practicing. Wei immediately asked about the guy's well-being. He was worried about the child all that time. Lehan was happy to see the teacher at the door. Our character felt better because of how worried the man was about him. The instructor said that he had brought some food for his student. From the next day, Lehan could continue his studies in Class V. The teacher was proud of the protagonist's achievements in telekinesis. It turns out that he didn't just stay in the hospital all this time. Lehan confirmed that his energy potential was low, so he decided to stretch his skills. Wei Chen was pleased with his student that he was developing his skills, because wielding a weapon for a Superman is not all he should be able to do. You also needed to have some level of telekinesis. The instructor continued to say that the fight would mostly take place in the air, and he definitely needed the ability to catch the weapon if it was knocked out of his hands. While talking about this, the man was struck by an idea, which he immediately began to implement. The mentor went to the reception desk so that his student could be released from the hospital for a short time. With difficulty, he succeeded, and they went to the gym. Lehan asked why they came to the gym if there were no training sessions there. The instructor was concerned about the student's spiritual development. Judging by what the man saw, his chances of awakening the ability are low. Lehan's classmates already mastered teleportation and fire. Unfortunately, the main character needs to give up hope for such skills. Then the question arose of how our character could fight in such a war for which they were being prepared. The answer to this question was simple. He just needed to understand it correctly. Wei Chen believed that the orphan needed to invest everything in his development of telekinesis. Then this skill can become his superpower. Lehan thought about his mentor's words. He really needed them at that time. The instructor continued to explain that a superpower is like a muscle. The more the child exercises it, the stronger it becomes. The division of students into ranks was nothing more than a convention. The generation of these children has immeasurably greater potential than the guys who studied with instructors. So Lehan needs to work hard to develop telekinesis. The main character immediately understood and accepted the mentor's words. Standing in front of Class B, our character understood how difficult it would be for him here, but he had no right to give up. Gathering all his strength into a fist, the guy headed towards the audience. Entering the classroom, Lehan encountered a stranger. A Class B student asked the main character who he was. Taking a closer look at the newcomer, he realized that Lehan was standing in front of him. Our character was surprised that someone besides his classmates knew his name. The stranger said that the orphan had already become famous throughout the institutions of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. The stranger introduced himself that he was the head of Class B, and his name was Dmitry Vladimirovich Petrov. In order not to say his full name, you can simply call him Dima. The headman hoped for the cooperation and friendship of the leader of the gang of saboteurs. Lehan appeared just in time. The students had just free time for training. Classmates headed to the gym to practice their fighting skills. Dmitry led the main character to the hall where the training took place. Lehan thought about how much he loved training. The daily routine in the ARC stifled the monotony of our character. Compared to others, his abilities are at a low level, and this always caused additional stress in him. He was always one step away from expulsion. The only activity where the main character can completely let off steam and have a blast is training. Dima watched as his classmate rushed to train. Lehan grabbed his spear and headed out to train. Surprisingly, the guy defeated all his rivals. Our character asked his classmates why they were so weak. It seemed that they came here to have fun. Kuro was among the defeated, his eyes filled with tears again. The friend's superpower was energy potential, so they found it funny to look down on those less capable. These guys needed to be thanked that martial arts competition was not part of the compulsory training program. The class leader watched with interest what was happening. Dmitry thought that the guy in front of him was even stronger than he expected. Finally, a student appeared with whom Dima wanted to fight from the heart. The spear had to be raised and the fight continued. Kuro reached out to the weapon, but never took it in his hands. A classmate asked him to take a spear and attack. Another guy came out from the side and said that it was his turn to fight. Despite this, he agreed to be third. Kuro was never able to pick up a weapon. Lehan remembered how a few weeks ago he stood before the beginning of a new life. The main character was called by his classmates to continue. Our character attacked his fellow students and defeated them again. The orphan enthusiastically threw back all the attackers. He loved to fight and enjoyed it. Classmates in the air wanted to attack Kuro. The protagonist's friend sat motionless on the floor. Our character stood in front of him and shielded him from his rivals. Kuro reached out to his friend, but he did not immediately react. Lehan shouted at Dmitry and asked if in their class it is called healthy competition to attack one with a large number. Kuro tried to stop our character, but he failed. In the ARC, it was normal for many strong to attack one weak one. Students were taught that the enemy does not spare anyone, so there is no place for the weak in this organization. Dmitry noticed that Khan is special, but his friend is not like him, and our character is now doing him a disservice. This action will not bring anything good in the future. Unfortunately, it was impossible to argue with such facts. But even in such cases, attacking 3 people against one is wrong. Classmates pretended to understand their prefect's hint, but in reality, they did not attach any importance to this. Dmitry invited Lehan to show his classmates a real fight. Naturally, the main character accepted the elder's challenge. Dmitry attacked Lehan in the air, swinging his spear with force. The main character took the blow with dignity without any hesitation. Another one soon followed. Our character thought that if he blocked 2 attacks in a row, the spear would break, so he decided to do so. First, it will distract the enemy, and then knock him down. The main character fought as if this battle was decisive. Swinging his spear, Lehan wanted to hit the enemy's legs and wanted to knock him down. The guy even thought that the fight was over, but did not fully appreciate his opponent. Pointing his spear at Dmitry, our orphan was pleased with himself. Pushing off from the ground and jumping up into the air, Dima dodged another aimed weapon strike at him, but it still hurt him a little. But he quickly reacted and pushed away to hit his opponent with his head. The impact of the children's heads was very strong and unfortunately was not harmless. Lehan immediately fell to the ground, but he was already accustomed to street fighting, so this was not the first time for him. Rising after an unexpected reception, the main character said that they were training martial arts, not fighting on the street. The headman ordered the brutality to watch not only the weapons. He shared that he started practicing sambo as soon as he started walking. If he comes across an orphan again, he won't collect the bones. The main character became interested in the fact that his elder would defeat the dragon with sambo techniques, to which he received the answer that if necessary, Dmitri would strangle the enemy in war with his bare hands. Classmates called the headman a tiger cub from Siberia. They sincerely supported him in this battle. Dmitri shouted to his friends that he had not been a tiger cub for a long time, and it was stupid for them to call him that. Lehan watched as his new classmates fooled around. Although they insulted Dmitri, it was not serious. Everyone is already attached to each other. It was visible and felt. The main character looked at his friend. He felt sorry for him. He was never able to make friends with anyone from those guys, and seemed like an orphan compared to them. Our character understood that Kuro would have a hard time with his classmates, but they are now in the same class. The guy will support him in everything and help him. Dmitri shouted to Lehan that he would stop staring around. It was time for them to continue the fight. The guys started fighting again. Neither of them wanted to give in to the other. Both opponents had no desire to drag out the fight. It was necessary to finish it as soon as possible and become a winner. Dmitri broke his spear and decided to attack the enemy with the sharp end. Now was the right time to end this battle. The headman waited and accepted every enemy attack. The main character skillfully used a spear, unlike his classmates. He turned out to be an excellent fighter. The enemy forces were almost equal. It was impossible to tell who would win this battle. Nobody wanted to give in. The students watched in fascination and supported their headman. Lehan's spear broke. Dmitri broke it with a blow. Now both opponents were disarmed. They were in the same conditions. The next second, the tiger cub rushed at our character with his bare hands. Using one of the sambo techniques, the headman knocked his classmate to the ground. The main character did not understand how he ended up on the floor. Most of the guys shouted and supported the headman, who was already sitting on our character and wringing his hand. Dmitri was determined to break the enemy's arm if the leader of the gang of saboteurs did not surrender. The audience chanted in support of the headman, and not a single person shouted to support the main character. Despite the pain, Lehan did not think of giving up. He is not used to losing and admitting that he is weak. Dmitri was confused by the enemy's self-confidence, but still he did not stop. The cries in support of Dima did not subside. The students were involved in a fight. After all, the headman broke the main character's arm. Twisted in pain, Lehan never admitted defeat. Dmitri was at a loss from enduring the enemy's pain. The tiger cub once again repeated that the enemy should have surrendered when he spoke. Otherwise, such a situation would not have happened. Kuro looked at his friend with tears and could not help him. The guy understood that he himself was partly to blame for what happened to Lehan, since he stood up for him. Dmitri was amazed that despite the fact that his arm was broken, his opponent did not cry or scream in pain. In addition, the headman asked one of his classmates to take our character to the first aid station. Only after his request did something happen that he definitely did not expect. Lehan rose to his feet and addressed him, saying that apparently his opponents had previously done nothing but cry. Having hit the elder with the remainder of the broken spear, he fell. The main character shouted that he stood up and continued the fight, but received no answer. The headman lay motionless in front of him. He was already unconscious. Looking at Dmitri, Lehan realized that he had seriously injured him. The headman was unconscious. Dima regained consciousness when he was already in the hospital room. The headman did not immediately understand what had happened to him and why he was in the hospital. Looking around, the guy saw Lehan on the next bed, watching a video message from someone. He was sent by a major who took care of the protagonist's brothers. The man praised the boy for trying so hard and reaching such a level. The brothers were okay thanks to the child's efforts. The officer promised to send a video next time so that the guy could see his younger ones for himself. This message contained only photos of joyful children, but that was enough for Khan. The main character made sure that his little ones were in order and protected. Our character even cried from what he saw. He was glad that everything was going well for them and they were safe. Noticing that Dmitri woke up, Lehan asked his classmate to flip through the next photo. Not understanding what they wanted from him, the headman hesitated a little, but then fulfilled his classmate's request. Dima wanted to object to why he was doing this at all, but the main character reminded him that he had broken his arm, and our character was not able to do it himself. Dmitri decided to remember that he had a crack in his head, which was made by his classmate, and he also attacked him when he turned away. To which I received the answer that there was no need to turn away. This is the ARC. Such methods are acceptable here. The headman had nothing to object to, since everything really was like that. Lehan decided to justify himself a little, because he was angry then. Although he was not angry with Dmitri, the headman still suffered. The Siberian tiger cub also confirmed that he was wrong. He also promised that next time in their fight, he would not give in and would definitely win. Lehan remembered how his classmates treated Kuro. He thought it was wrong and they shouldn't have done it. The main character was supposed to lend a helping hand to his friend, but instead he got into a fight. Dmitri understood his classmates' feelings, but he still shared that when they go to the second year, they may die during training, and they must be prepared for anything. Lehan didn't understand what his classmate was talking about. He first heard that they could die during training in his second year. The headman decided to show our character something. The main character did not understand where they were in such a hurry, but it was easier for Dmitri to show than to explain everything. The guys came to the intensive care unit. In this place, one could hear that if a soldier was breathing, he would be saved. Doctors ran past them, carrying a student in critical condition in front of them. Seeing the high school student in the state he was in, the orphan got scared. The main character became interested in what happened to that guy and why he was in such a state. Dmitri explained that these are all the consequences of dangerous training that await them. The leader of the gang of saboteurs was surprised that the guy who was taken was a student. He looked like an adult man. The victim was tall and looked more like an instructor than a student. Dmitri thought about it and decided to explain some aspects of training in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. The fact is that when students enter their second year, scientists begin injecting drugs into their bodies. Under the influence of those drugs, the children grow rapidly and their bodies quickly become like those of an adult. Dmitri also reminded that already in the third year they will have to fight the dragon and his army. Lehan realized that the ARC workers would not wait for these children to grow up naturally. They need them as weapons in a very short time. For the main character, rapid growth was a very good choice. A classmate's desire to quickly become an adult came as a surprise to the headman. He had no idea why the orphan wanted to grow up so quickly. Lehan shared that living in a normal world, he always wanted to become an adult quickly. After all, in order to survive, a child previously had to do many things. He almost always confronted older and stronger people. Most of the fights were with older men, not with peers. Naturally, the elders had more power than him. For the most part, he lost no matter how hard he tried. The forces were often unequal, and the main character could not do anything against them. Therefore, Lehan did not need a happy childhood. In his world, the main thing was to survive. Dmitri understood that in front of him stood in appearance a child, but in fact his classmate was the most mature in the ARC. The main character understood what the headmen wanted to tell him. After what they saw, the guys hurried to return to the ward. After discharge, classmates came to study. Instructor Red had already announced that they would have aerial training. Students were required to do everything they were taught at the institution. The teacher pointed to the backpacks and ordered them to check their things before leaving. Dmitri decided to tease Lehan, pointing out that they had just left the hospital and were going straight to such a difficult training session. He said that maybe the student misses his hospital bed. Lehan said nothing, just smiled silently at the headman in response. Opening the backpack, the main character saw that there was a lot of food there. Our character suggested that this training would not be easy for them. Looking around, Dmitri saw that some students had already opened their rations and began to diligently sample the food. Suddenly, the Siberian tiger cub's gaze stopped on someone. The headman turned to Lehan and asked him to look to the side at the blonde. Dmitri's gaze was fixed on Del Simon. The tiger cub wanted to fight with the arrogant one and test his strength in battle. Simon felt someone's gaze on him and turned to the crowd in which the headman was sitting. Golden-haired couldn't understand what was wrong with those guys and why they were acting strangely. Lehan quickly turned his gaze to Kuro, who was sitting across the student from him. He looked very sad. The main character wanted to somehow help his friend, but did not know how best to do it. John Red shouted to his students that their time was up and it was time to go to the yard of the plane. Having put on their helmets and picked up their bags, the students ran to the plane. One by one, they all boarded the plane. The instructor watched his subordinates intently. When all the students were on board, the planes took off. John Red, looking into the sky, turned to his colleagues, saying that they too should go the same way. Red thought to himself that this was the last time they would wipe the snot of these children. Kuro remembered the first time he saw Lehan, how his helping hand reached out to those in need. How the main character was the only one who stood up for the boy who was bullied on the first day, and how he helped him overcome the run. A friend understood that our character was not like others at first sight, and after a while his abilities confirmed this. Unfortunately, in this situation in which Kuro now finds himself, Lehan cannot help him, no matter how he calls him and asks for help. Now the boy was completely alone with the problem. Some time ago, all the freshmen were flying to air training. Then, sitting on the plane, the guys thought how long they still had to fly. Looking out the window, the territory of the ARC seemed small to the children. The watch received a notification indicating their location. The purpose of the training was to survive on the desert island over which they were located. The instructor told his students that the food in the bag should be enough for 2 days. Then they will get their own food. The first-year students, having learned what their assignment was, were very scared. None of them could even imagine that they would have to try to survive on a desert island, and for another 2 days. Only Dmitri liked the task. It felt like camp to him. John Red announced that the stay on the island would be a week. After 7 days, the instructors will return for the children. This information shocked the students even more. The instructor pulled one of the students from the water who refused to take the test. Turning to his colleague, Red asked if this was the last of those who gave up. After reviewing the map and the locations of the remaining first years, the man confirmed that this was the last one. John was interested in how the recruiters were located throughout the territory. His colleague said that at first they were evenly distributed, but over time the 7 students merged into one group. Red noticed that they were not so harmless. They even act like adults. The instructor understood that if these children were left uncontrolled, they would begin to decide everything by force, and instead of acting together, they would rob each other. And so it was. A group of guys had already started robbing fellow students as soon as they managed to unite. Inspecting the loot, the gang member was glad that their victim had not yet touched the food. They hastened to show the booty to their leader, and show what great fellows they were. Carl, who considered himself the smartest among these idiots, sat and waited for his subordinates to bring the catch. But the leader was not in the mood that his charges had been wandering around somewhere for so long. The gang promised that they would look for food until the sunset, but they themselves did something unclear. Carl did not like this behavior, especially that they did not listen to him. This scoundrel assembled a team so that no one could defeat them, and not in order to eat. One of the children shouted. He agreed with the leader. Others also picked it up. Together they considered themselves stronger than Dmitri, Lehan, and Del Simon. Carl heard someone calling for help. This was what they needed. The guy began to listen to see if he heard someone's voice. After some time, he realized that they were really calling for help, since the other guys also heard the scream. The whole gang went in search of their new victim. Lehan climbed out of the water. The guy swam for a long time to the shore. The main character understood that he had lost a lot of time and had no time to rest. Our character looked around the beach and needed to find a corner for the night. His gaze settled on a place that seemed ideal to set up camp. It was only necessary to find shelter. Making his way through the bushes, the orphan reasoned that the ration that the instructor gave him for someone like him who had been starving all his childhood would be enough not only for 2 days, but even more. The guy understood that in the current situation, many first-year students would begin to take food from the weaker ones. He wondered if Del Simon had started doing this yet. At that time, the golden-haired one was already making his way around the island and inspecting the territory. Arrogant met with Dmitri, who had long wanted to fight with him. The tiger cub was happy that he was the first to see Simon on the island. He immediately offered to fight. Del thought it was childish. It was wasteful given the current situation. The blonde turned away and left Dmitri, saying that he was not going to waste his energy on him. The headman did not expect such an answer. He rushed after Simon, trying to explain that he wanted to fight in a fight. He had a purely sporting interest. Simon thought Dima was crazy that he still had such thoughts during survival training on a deserted island. Dmitri continued to make excuses. He realized that he was wrong, because the headman just wanted to get to know his classmate better. To Del, this freshman seemed like a huge bore. The sun was setting, and evening was approaching. The first-year students had their first night on the island. Carl and his assembled gang of scoundrels were approaching the student who was calling for help. The villains came to the tree where Kuro was stuck and begged them for salvation. Instead of helping, the bandits took the bag with things. In addition, Carl also mocked the guy, thanking him for being so stupid and inexperienced. Kuro shouted and asked them to leave him at least some food, but no one paid attention to his plea. The leader replied that he was also lucky that he was hanging on a tree. Otherwise, his guys would have beaten the guy. So it's better for him to hang on a tree and wait for instructors. The gang took the loot and left, leaving Kuro alone. They were pleased with themselves. At the end, they added that he would not die of hunger in a week. And if it rains and he can drink, he will definitely be alive. After the guy was left alone, he began to cry. It was the only thing he could do. Kuro began to remember how everyone forbade him to whine. The first of the guys was Del Simon on the day of admission. The gang members who had just robbed him and left him alone also didn't like crybabies. Dmitri treated them the same way, who fought with Lehan because he stood up for his friend. Kuro filled with thoughts why he can't just cry, because he wants to do it. This made him cry even more. Hanging from a tree all alone, he was hysterical for a while. The guy thought for a long time about what happened to him during his entire stay in the ARC. Tears were constantly in his eyes. He never stopped crying. At some point, it seemed to him that someone else was approaching him. Through the tears that flowed from his eyes, Kuro could not understand whether this was a vision or not. Opening his eyes and looking closely, he again saw a shadow walking towards him through the bushes. It seemed to be Lehan. Tears fell to the ground, making it difficult to look closely. Kuro closed his eyes, believing that it was better for him to sleep than to feed himself false hopes of salvation. Opening his eyes, he again peered at the outline of the child, whom he seemed to see below him. Moments later, the shadow became mist and evaporated into thin air, and she didn't appear again. The guy thought that he simply dreamed of what he wanted to see. Lehan was approaching the tree where Kuro was stuck. Coming closer, the main character turned to the guy to find out who was there. After the rescue, the comrades built a hut in the area that Lehan had spotted as soon as he arrived on the island. Kuro, having come to his senses, immediately got out of the tent. He needed to make sure that everything was real. Seeing the main character in action, the guy was surprised that this was not a dream, and he was really saved. Lehan was glad that his friend woke up and felt well. While he was sleeping, our character was preparing a spear so that he would have some kind of weapon for protection. Kuro was happy to see our character. He didn't know what to say after what happened. It was necessary to have breakfast. The guys were hungry, so there was plenty of food for them. Since Lehan did not find Kuro's backpack, he divided his rations between two. That food was barely enough for one. The boy understood that this was not enough for them, but he could not refuse because he was too hungry. Thanking his friend, Kuro quickly and greedily swallowed the food. During breakfast, he called himself names and considered himself a burden. He was truly sincerely grateful to the main character for both the rescue and the breakfast. Now their main task was to find water. At that time, the students were monitored by an instructor through drones that flew throughout the island. John Red observed the movements of each student and their actions. For the mentor, it was like a somewhat exciting movie. The silence in the video surveillance room was interrupted by Octo, who began to respect that his colleague was smoking in a place where it was prohibited. The bald man mocked his friend, saying that he was also trying to be cool, that he was sitting in the dark. He was also wondering if there was anyone who stood out from the crowd. John Red said that there is one smart guy who is completely sick in his head, and he invited the engineer to see for himself what the guy had done. The student believed that a week on the island was complete nonsense and he just needed to survive. This guy was from Norway, and his name was Knud Meyer. The smart guy made a raft, and decided that he should return to the Arke his own way rather than fight for life on the island. Lehan and Kuro found a reservoir of fresh water. The main character checked whether the water they found was drinkable. Having tested the liquid for taste, he invited his friend to drink the same. Now they could drink enough and move on, gaining strength. The sun rose high and it was difficult to walk during the day. The comrades decided that it was better for them to look for shelter. Lehan understood that they also needed to get food so that they would both have enough for some time. While the main character was thinking about food and where it could be found on the island, something was happening to Kuro. The guy began to glow brightly. The guy as fast ran up to his friend, shouting to the main character stopped. Kuro unexpectedly grabbed our character by the hand and did not allow him to do one more step. Orphan's foot stepped on a dry one twig, and friends waited an unpleasant surprise. Opened before them trap. Though she wasn't big, but if you fell into a hole, you could was tuck. Lehan began to ask his friend how he found out about this. In a second, the main character realized that his classmate was seeing visions. Kuro said that this was the case. He really saw everything as if he had witnessed how it was made. The guy also told how everything began to spin for him, and what sensations he had all that time. The main character understood that his friend was not lying or delusional now. It turns out that everything was so. Lehan suggested that his comrade had developed a new power, similar to a vision that allows him to see the near future or something like that. It was a cool and useful power. It turned out that Kuro became agitated because of what happened and a new power was revealed to him. This survival task can help a classmate develop their abilities even more. The main character's shelter was found by guys who united in a gang to rob from individuals and weaker ones. Carl looked into the tent and looked around, looking for something interesting to him. The gang leader realized that there were 2 students there. Having looked around the shelter, they found nothing except the dishes with which the main character and his friend ate. One of the bandits offered to stay and wait for them, and then fight with them, and take away what they had left. But the leader had a different idea. He understood that the owners had not gone far, most of all for water. Carl suggested returning later and catching them when they were resting. Kuro and Lehan returned to their hideout. The guy was very tired from going for water and discovering a new superpower. The friend already wanted to lie down and rest. Our character supported him, reminding him that they had only a short distance left. They were almost there. Suddenly, something caught the main character's attention. He asked his classmate to stop and not go further. The leader of the gang of saboteurs picked up a stone from the ground and realized that someone else had come to their tent. Lehan told Kuro that before leaving, he left a stone at the entrance as a mark to understand whether someone was visiting them or not. Now this pebble has been moved, so someone came and went inside. Not far from the tent, Lehan saw a couple of footprints, and looking where they were pointing, the guys realized that there were a whole bunch of prints. The main character said that apparently they were found by a gang with a lot of people, so it's easier for them to rob others. The friends decided that they urgently needed to pack up and leave to look for another place to stay. Having folded the tent, the classmates went in search of a new place to stay for the night. The sun was setting. The night was getting closer. There was less and less time left to search. Lehan understood that they needed to find a place to shelter as quickly as possible before night fell. Kuro felt bad. His eyes began to close. The guy could not keep them open. The main character turned and looked at his friend. His eyes lost their pupils, and it was clear that he was about to lose consciousness. From Kuro, just like when he saw that there was a trap in front of them. The pupils appeared in the guy's eyes again, only not his natural color but blue, as if from some psychic. In front of him he saw a panther around which had the same red aura. The cat walked purposefully towards the main character, who, seeing her, stood motionless. In an instant, the animal jumped straight at its target. Kuro, waking up from the vision, quickly reacted and threw Lehana off the path on which he stood with all the force he could muster. The main character did not understand what his friend had just done. Miraculously, the guy was able to find the strength to push his classmate away. He himself was also a few steps away from the place where the orphan had just stood. As soon as our character fell to the ground, a black panther appeared in front of him, jumping to the place where he had just stood. Lehan looked, not understanding how a wild cat ended up in front of him, especially in the place where he had just stood. The panther turned around and purposefully walked towards the main character. The predator's eyes glowed bright yellow. The main character began to look for a weapon, but his spear was on the other side of the animal. There was no way he could reach it. Black Panther looked at our character with interest. She did not take her burning eyes off him. The cat showed all its power and took a position to pounce on its object. Our character has already prepared for the fact that this predator will now tear him apart. Suddenly, a strong flame of fire appeared out of nowhere. Looking up, the main character saw that someone was attacking the panther with fiery superpower. This attack scared off the predator. The wild cat ran deep into the island. Jose, who was nearby and came to help his classmate, completely drove the animal away. Lehan did not expect to see the old head of his class and receive help from him. A classmate asked if everything was okay and made sure that the panther had run away. The main character looked at his savior and was glad to see Jose. A classmate turned to our character and asked him if Kuro was with him. The leader of the gang of saboteurs noticed that the former headman's leg was bandaged. Our character asked what happened to him. Jose said that she fell into a trap made by some scoundrels. His leg still hurt, but he could walk slowly. The guy was glad that he met these classmates and not someone else. The friends realized that the trap could have been set by the same bandits who found their hideout. Jose shared that he guessed that someone would rob others, but he doesn't even have food, so there's nothing to steal from him. The guy continued to say that as soon as he fell into the trap, he immediately decided to eat everything, and that's what he did. Lehan thought that his comrade was very stupid for doing this and not thinking about the future. Night has come. The comrades urgently needed to find a place to stay for the night. The leader of the newly formed gang on the island could not sleep. He recalled the day when he found out what his father wanted to do with him, and where he was sending him to study. Everything happened at their house after returning from some trip. That day, the father was glad that his son's detector went off during security at the airport. This meant that the child could become a Superman and have superpowers. Dad believed that this was a great chance for his child to join the ARC. But Carl was filming a film, and that was the main thing for him at that moment. The father was not happy with the fact that his son was engaged in acting. The man wanted the guy to forget about filming and join an institution where he would develop his abilities. The child would achieve recognition and fame without a circus on camera. The elder Hines believed that telepaths would go down in the history of the country when the war with dragons ended. And his beloved son is given this opportunity to become the one who will rule the whole people over time. Standing in front of the door to the Ark, Carl did not share his dad's wishes, but he could not go against his will. The guy understood that he didn't belong here, but he couldn't turn around and leave. Dimitri played sports in his free time, while Del Simon was just sitting under a tree relaxing and having a snack. The blonde was amazed that that tiger cub still had the strength to do push-ups. Dima glanced at Simon sitting under the tree, who did not stop chewing. Del decided to clarify that they no longer had food. He was wondering what Dimitri was going to do for the remaining 5 days. This was not scary for the tiger cub, since he was an athlete. Such a test did not pose any difficulty for him. Dima believed that to be a good fighter, you need to train a lot and diligently. But Simon had a different opinion. In his opinion, telepaths should not fight with their fists. Dimitri came up with an idea of what he needed to say in order to somehow piss off his companion. The Siberian tiger cub said how much he misses Lehan and, if possible, will compete and practice his fighting skills. The Russian was not mistaken. Del immediately changed his face and could hardly restrain his strength when he heard the name of the main character. He even asked if he had fought with him. Dima was pleased with himself. Now he could compete in strength with Simon. After spending the night in a new shelter, our heroes began a new day. Lehan wished his comrades good morning. He had suggestions for his classmates. The main character now suggested that they stick together, so it would be easier for them to overcome difficulties during the test. Our character decided that it would be better for him and Kuro to go in search of food and wood for the fire. Jose's leg still hurt, so it was better for him to stay in the cave and gain strength while waiting for his classmates. The guy apologized for the fact that he was still useless. Lehan assured him not to worry, since thanks to his pyrokinesis abilities, their group had a great chance of surviving this training. Friends went in search of food. The guys decided that it was better to go to a pond with fish. The main character looked around the lake. He realized that fish would be good for food, so they would need to catch it. Kuro asked his friend if he knew how to fish, since it was his first time. The leader of the gang of saboteurs looked at his comrade and thanked him. The words of gratitude were for saving him from the panther. After all, if the student had not seen what would happen, they could have died. And it was he who found them a new refuge. Lehan admitted that he used to believe that he had to take care of his comrade, but when he was in the hospital and saw a student being taken to the intensive care unit to be saved, he realized that he could not do this all the time. So he didn't know what to do. When they got to the island, then the main character saw that the genius of telepathy was standing in front of him. It is this boy who has the strength thanks to which he can protect them all. Our character invited him to help each other from now on. For Lehan, Kerr became a friend. When he said these words, the guy fell into a stupor. No one has ever called him a friend. The guy was from distant Japan and kept aloof from everyone. He was an orphan who didn't even have a name. Due to the fact that the child had dark skin, he was named Kuro. It was a common name in Japan. All his life, the little Japanese heard only that he was a whiner, a worthless fellow. All he did was cry. Not a single good word about him. For the first time, he had someone he could trust. For Lehan, these abilities were very cool. He thought about what to do next. Kuro approached the water and decided to use his telekinesis. Concentrating on his strength, the guy carefully looked into the water, which had already begun to glow bright blue. The Japanese saw where the fish was going to swim. This was good for them in fishing. The main character thought that this guy had incredible abilities from the very beginning. Now they will be able to use them for survival purposes by catching a lot of fish. Kuro was focused on knowing when to catch in time. They were actually able to catch food for lunch. Now they definitely won't starve. Friends were glad that they managed to do this. Now they won't be hungry. All that remained was to prepare it. It was the third day on the island. Friends with a fresh catch headed to their shelter, where Jose was waiting for them. Lehan praised his friend for becoming more skillful. The guys discussed that their third friend had already learned how to cook fish deliciously. Approaching the main character's shelter, something alerted him. The leader of the gang of saboteurs realized that something had happened while they were away. Our character asked Kuro to stay where he was and wait for him while he found out what happened. Lehan quickly ran to their cave, where Jose was himself. Having run for cover, the main character was haunted by the thought of what could have happened while they were gone. Looking around, the main character's gaze fell on Jose. The guy was lying unconscious on the floor. He did not respond to his classmates' screams. Simon finally agreed to fight Dmitri. The blonde was surprised that the Russian took swords with him to the island for survival training. Dmitri admitted that he wanted to learn how to fight with swords in both hands. He was surprised why Simon agreed to this fight. Del knew that if this guy really fought with Lehan, then he was the prefect of Class B. The blonde heard that his instructors were going to transfer him to Class A. This was an opportunity for him to test whether he really was an adroit student. Dmitri caught himself thinking that he was starting to like this guy with whom he was now on the island. The guys decided it was time to start their fight. During the first attack, Dmitri thought that now his enemy would not change his mind. Dmitri was amazed at Simon's speed during the battle. As it turned out, Del was strong not only in superpowers but in battles. The tiger cub was not at the level to resist the blonde. But still, Dmitri was not so quick to end the fight. He wanted to win this fight. Simon pretended to retreat during the battle. This was done so that the opponent would not consider him strong. The Siberian boy believed that his enemy's retreat was just what was needed for his next attack. It was not difficult for Del to take attacks from the opposing attacker. He fought with dignity. It was not for nothing that he was considered the best student in the course. Having avoided Dmitri's blow, Del already knew what to do next to disarm his enemy. Having once again replayed his next attack in his head, Simon got down to business. The blonde, also using his super strength in addition to his weapon, struck Dmitri on the head from behind. The child from Siberia thought that he better concentrate so as not to miss such blows again. Quickly moving away and analyzing what had happened, the tiger cub attacked his opponent. Del also attacked him from his side, trying to strike him in the face. The Class B prefect dodged in time, thereby avoiding a direct blow from the spear. Looking at their fight, it seemed that the blonde was beginning to enjoy their battles. He seemed to be getting excited. Simon attacked his opponent again. This was not the kind of fight Dima was counting on when he invited his fellow student to fight. Quickly getting to his feet after being knocked down again, the Russian fellow got ready to attack. Screaming, Dmitri, with the anger that was inherent in him during the battle, attacked the enemy. Only this did not scare Simon. The guy had a motionless facial expression. He was just waiting for the next attack to carry out his plan. The tiger cub really believed that this was his last attack. after which he would be the winner. Del Simon used his superpower, his eyes glowing brightly. The blonde began to fight using his abilities. Using telekinesis, Simon defeated Dimitri without much effort. Del apologized and admitted that in hand-to-hand combat his opponent won. But since they are telepaths, they must use their powers, and in this he was the best on the course. More than winning such a fight, the blonde was interested in who was stronger, Lehan or this guy. At that time, the main character rushed to Jose and shouted, asking him to come to his senses. The guy woke up. He barely squeezed out the first words. But still, our character felt better that his classmate was alive. Jose said that he was alive, but it was clear from the guy that he had almost no strength left. The comrades gathered in the cave and waited for their friend to come to his senses and gain some strength so that he could speak. Our character asked who did this and what happened while they were away. It was difficult for Jose, but he was already able to tell who came. The guy shared that it was Karl Heinz with a squad that he created of 7 people. Those spineless, headless guys took all their food. They will come again, so the comrades should find a more reliable place. Lehan didn't like the idea of giving this place to those scum. He had his own thoughts towards them. The main character objected. He did not consider himself an idiot who would allow all sorts of spineless people to mock his friends. Jose did not expect to hear that these guys considered him their friend. He was pleasantly surprised by the statement. The guys decided to find a new shelter, giving the bandits a chance to temporarily stay in their cave. Lehan came up with a plan according to which they would take those scoundrels by surprise at sunset, leaving the injured Jose alone. The main character and Kuro went to reproduce their plan in reality, to take revenge on the scoundrels. As our character predicted, the gang took over their hideout. The comrades agreed to begin implementing the revenge plan when Kuro was ready. After all, most of this battle depended on him. The brainless ones discussed that they could not have done it alone and would not have survived on the island without uniting and starting to rob. But now together they will be able to overcome everyone who is not with them. Concentrating, Kuro thought that Lehan was the only one who believed in him. He promised himself that he would not let him down. The Japanese began to summon his abilities. He glowed with a blue aura. Using telepathy, the fellow lifted the stones and held them in the air. The main character immediately caught up with his friend. There was no time to postpone the fight. Everyone was ready to attack. Stones were thrown at the lawless people. The villains did not immediately understand what was happening. The robbers immediately took up arms and began to look around, looking for where they were being attacked from and who dared to do this. Karl ran out shouting for everyone to come out of the cave, as they had unexpectedly been ambushed. The stone attack was successful. One of the spineless ones fell from the blow and ached in pain, unable to get up. Seeing where they were rushing from, the bandits rushed into those bushes, trying to avoid the flying weapons. Only to their great bad luck, Kuro saw where they would rush to run. He knew about their every step. Therefore, soon the stupid people saw only darkness. Now it's time for Lehan to take on these less than intelligent classmates and show them that they shouldn't be so self-confident. Among these guys, there was no equal to the main character in terms of fighting ability. Our character defeated almost all of his friend's offenders without much effort. The only thing he hasn't fought yet is the leader of the band of brats, Karl Heinz. This is exactly what the German was waiting for. He also wanted to test how strong Lehan was in a fight. Now he will have the opportunity to do this. Now only these two were left alone. They understood that they would have to fight. Lehan was determined to take revenge on his rival for what this gang had done to his friends. Karl was determined to fight Lehan, hoping to teach him a lesson. For a moment, the blonde thought that the main character himself had scattered his gang of 6 people. But he himself could not believe it. The guy understood that there must be someone else. He became interested in who the orphan came with. Kuro came out from the bushes from which he had attacked his opponents. Lehan asked his friend not to help him out in this battle. He wanted to deal with this bully himself. Karl couldn't believe that just the 2 of them were able to defeat an entire gang, and especially since Kuro was the second participant, a guy who just cried every now and then all the time during school. The main character said that they came to take revenge on them for what they did to Jose. Our character wanted to prove that this scoundrel will not get away with everything so easily, with all his actions. The German reached for a stick that lay near his fellow gang member. He believed that the time had come to deal with his opponent. He even promised out loud that this time Lehan would not feel too bad. Having decided to accept the attack, the main character asked his opponent not to talk, but to attack. Karl did not have to wait long. He immediately attacked the enemy. Much to his regret, our character was too tough for him. His first attack was repulsed, and he was also dealt a direct blow. After the first attempt to hit, the blonde immediately found himself on the ground. He didn't want to lie down for a long time, so he immediately began the next attack. And this blow was foreseen, and Karl again received a spear in his body. Rising, the German did not want to believe that his classmate was actually much stronger than him and his gang. Standing without any appearance that it was hard for him, Lehan asked his opponent if it was hard for the guy. The main character even made warnings that this was just the beginning. The real battle was ahead. Carl still didn't want to believe that he would lose, so he believed that his fellow student was just showing off and nothing more. And again he attacked the orphan, and again unsuccessfully. The attack was overpowered and directed against him. This went on more than once for some time. After a couple of attempts to hit the main character, the bully ended up on the ground. Carl still couldn't believe that this guy was so strong. Lehan came to take revenge for the fact that this scoundrel did this to Jose. They beat the guy to such an extent that he almost had no living space left. He couldn't understand why they had to beat him so hard, what they wanted to prove by doing this. The German could not allow anyone to look down on him. This is exactly what it seemed to him now that our character was looking at him like that. Carl couldn't accept the fact that someone was better than him. The guy even forbade anyone to think that this could happen. Heinz was a well-known actor in Germany and had natural talent. He believed that it was only thanks to him that his father reached such heights in politics. But the head of the family thought differently. He didn't like his son's hobbies for cinema. He wanted the younger one to develop telepathy and become the savior of the world, who in years to come would be elevated and considered the ruler of this world. Carl was always taught to be the best, that no one could hold a candle to him. Likewise, in the ARC he made great efforts to achieve what he now had. The blonde couldn't let anyone ruin his progress. Therefore he acted like a coward and threw dirt in the enemy's face to blind him for a while. As soon as the dirt got into his eyes, the German immediately hit his opponent. Only by acting so vilely and cowardly was he able to defeat Lehan. The main character fell to the ground. Kuro could not quietly watch his friend being beaten and immediately rushed to his aid. Getting excited, Carl continued to beat our character, thus satisfying his pride. Seeing that their fellow student was approaching him, he immediately shouted to him to stop and not dare to run towards them. The Japanese boy stopped immediately when he heard the order. The blonde continued to strike Lehan, content with this action. Only this time Kuro couldn't just stand by and watch his friend get beaten. Having thrown the main character unconscious onto the floor, the German was pleased with himself. He thought he had beaten the guy. The next person Carl wanted to attack and beat was Kuro, who was standing not far from him. Angrily, the German promised that he would teach them a lesson and show them who was the strongest. Kuro didn't wait for his opponent's attack. He was the first to use his powers against the blonde. This made Carl even more angry. He believed that his fellow student had no right to attack such a skilled person like him. Only the Japanese understood that he could not abandon his friend in trouble. After all, only Lehan has always supported him and is the only one who considers him his friend. Telepathy did not stop Carl. He grabbed his classmate and pulled him towards him. The blonde began to tell how he didn't like Kuro in the first minutes. He considered him useless and did not understand what he was doing in the ARC. While the German was busy with his fellow student, Lehan came to his senses and was already standing behind him. The main character immediately hit the enemy, avenging the blows he had just received from him. The force with which the blonde was struck knocked him off his feet, and he immediately lost his balance and fell. Lehan now decided to hit the enemy with words, saying that he was of no use. All he can do is find the sixes and hide behind them. Any of those with whom the main character fought, the same Del Simon or Dimitri. Also his friends Jose and Kuro. Any one of them is better than Carl. The blonde understood that his classmate was telling the truth. It wasn't his choice. From the very beginning, he did not want to go to the ARC, but dreamed of doing what he loved. The main character continued that a lot of fuss awaits this scoundrel if he gets ahead. To our character and to the other students, Karl Heinz was just a non-entity. This offended the blonde, but he understood that the orphan was right. He was afraid that if his fellow student struck him again, he might cause serious injury, since he was much stronger than him. Lehan swung and attacked the enemy with a spear, only he didn't stick the spear into Karl Heinz to cause damage to him. The main character was not such a scoundrel as his opponent. The spear passed near the German's face. By this act, our character proved that he is much better than this scoundrel. Everyone has reasons to be the best. But Lehan will not allow anyone to run past his friends. He will leave the blonde alone with his gang comrades who lost consciousness in the battle. The friends left the scene of the fight. Lying on the ground, Carl remembered his father and his cherished desire. The blonde never wanted to be a telepath. This is not his path, and he finally realized this. After some time, he left the ARC of his own free will. Lehan and Kuro returned to Jose, who was eagerly waiting for them. The friends continued to live on the island without any adventures. They were fishing and doing some business. 3 days later, helicopters flew to the island to pick up the guys. The guys said among themselves that they no longer wanted to repeat the experience they had here during their survival. The rest of their classmates thanked the trio for their help in surviving and completing the training. Fellow students were wondering how Kuro could catch fish for everyone. They also wondered why Jose was silent about the abilities he developed on the island. Jose thanked Lehan for stopping Carl and his gang, because if it weren't for the main character, they would have continued to rob. Our character received a notification that the training is over, He has shown excellent results over the past week. Della Simon and Dimitri received the same message. Dima was even glad to hear Sergeant Red's voice, which he certainly did not expect from himself. Now the survivors had to board the plane in the order in which they would be named. Once again, there will be a division between the best and the worst. The guys were divided, each got into his own helicopter and returned to the ARC base. John Red was on one of the planes that arrived to pick up the students. Along with the sergeant, Lehan, Kuro, Simon, and Dimitri were also on board. The instructor said that they were watched during the training all the time, and the teachers unanimously decided to leave these four in the RC. The mentor announced that this was not just survival training, but a test with the help of which they were looking for the savior of humanity. The sergeant did not stop to say that now Del Simon, Kuro, Dimitri, and along with them, Lehan enters the second year. Returning to the ARC for the students, the instructors gave the students a day off. Jose ran up to Lehan and asked him to kick the ball. The kids haven't had a day off for a long time, but now they have the opportunity to do something fun other than study. The main character liked his friend's idea to play football. Jose asked our character if he knew how to play. The orphan replied that he could. Whether it was good or not is another question. Since weekends are very rare in the ARC, there were many people who wanted to play or watch the game. On one team were Lehan, Jose, and Kuro. On the opposing team were Dimitri and Del Simon. The blonde forbade the tiger cub to use his abilities during the match. The Russian boy and the main character played a ball. In order for students to be allowed to rest, there had to be a special occasion for this. This is exactly what the meeting of instructors was like to approve or deny the transfer of 4 external students to the second year. At that time, a meeting of the institution's leaders and instructors had already begun. Sergeant John Red sat on one side of the table. On the other side was Wei Chen. They both wanted Lehan to be promoted to the second year. Seeing that everyone was assembled, Alexander Lacour, the chief of staff of the ARC, ordered the meeting to begin. Sasha Grace, who is the head of the medical corps, asked to talk about 4 applicants for early transition. The chief of staff ordered Della Simon and Dmitry Petrov to be transferred immediately without waiting for an explanation about this couple. And for the remaining 2, he had questions. He believed that it was still too early for the second year. Lacour was Lehan. The boss knew that the main character had a low level of ability. During his stay, he was never able to improve it. It was only thanks to Sergeant Red that the guy was transferred from Class D. Now, supervisor institutions, I was waiting for an explanation of why they should transfer this boy, who does not have normally developed superpowers, to the second year. Wei Chen was the first to start the story for our character. The instructor explained that this guy not only has good hand-to-hand combat skills, but also patience and strength. The ARC really needs tough fighters like him. Alexander Lacour was surprised that Instructor Wei praised this child so much. After all, rarely had anyone heard such praise from him about his students before. John Red knew that if his colleague did not respond well, the guy would not be transferred. The instructors continued that aside from his great potential in telekinesis, what was striking was his high ability to control the situation. Probably during the fight with Sergeant Lehan added telekinesis to the rotation power. The most amazing thing was that he did it all himself. No one taught the main character this, and the instructor had no explanation for why he did it that way. The ARC managers thought about this guy. While he was deciding his fate, he ordered to tell about the last contender. Lehan's team won the football game. Jose happily said that his friend told him that he couldn't do it, but in fact it was the other way around. Even the main character knows how to act very well. Dimitri and Simon were quarreling again. The Russian was wondering why a guy from England plays football so poorly if, according to rumors, all the players there are excellent. At the meeting, the doctor was angry after seeing information about the latest transfer applicant. In her opinion, Kuro was the weakest among the students mentally. Sasha Grace hastened to explain her decision. Since guys' bodies are modified immediately after the movement, the most important thing in this process is mental endurance. But Kuro, unfortunately, may not survive such a transformation. If drugs are introduced into the body in the state it is in now, they can kill the child. John Red did not agree with the doctor. He knew that the Japanese's telekinesis was at the highest level and more powerful than many of the talents they knew. And besides, this boy can look far into the future, which is an exceptional ability. Only the head of the institution was concerned not with the question of strength and superpowers, but with the guy's endurance. Will he be able to endure everything that the scientists give him? Sergeant Red understood what his leader was leading to, so he believed that Kuro and Lehan should be transferred together. Since our character exerts enormous force on the will of his friend, and plays the role of an older brother. Hearing the name of the main character again, Alexander Lacour, he was surprised how much his players wanted to transfer this guy to the second year. The head of the ARC even directly asked instructors Red and Wei about this. These men really did everything to get Lehan transferred. He was an unusual guy for them. For some reason, he attracted them to him, but the teachers could not understand what exactly. While the meeting was going on, the students continued the football match. The main character enjoyed the game. Our character played well together with Jose. They managed to outrun their opponents. The leader of the bandit saboteurs was sending excellent passes to his friend. Jose even made fun of the guys from the other team, asking them to take the ball away from him. The opposing goalkeeper was very excited when this couple approached him. After all, they could have scored another goal. Only this time the opposing team surrounded Jose, who ran perfectly towards the goal. This didn't stop the guys. He passed the ball to Lehan, who was open, and the main character continued to dribble the ball. Our character was deft, probably in everything, and this time he managed to score a goal. Naturally, Del Simon and Dmitry Petrov did not like this. The blonde man and the tiger cub looked contemptuously and dissatisfied at each other as their opponents rejoiced at another goal. Jose ran over and shook Lehan's hand. He thanked the main character for his excellent game. Sergeant Red suddenly appeared in front of the players and ordered them to stop playing, since the meeting has already ended and management will soon announce its decisions. But since all those responsible for the unscheduled meeting were on the field, the instructor decided to immediately tell them the result they had arrived at. All candidates for transfer to the second year were approved. Lehan did not believe what he heard. He was able to earn a transfer without flashy superpowers. Jose approached his friend with congratulations. He was sincerely happy for our character. Just seeing his friend's face, the classmate became nervous. The main character's face did not seem happy. Jose was happy for his friend. Finally, Lehan's moment of glory has come. The main character extended his hand to say goodbye to his comrade. They will now see each other in a few weeks. Sergeant Red was tired of watching the students rest and say goodbye, so he quickly dispersed everyone. The four, who were moving on to their second year, must go and pack their things. Lehan thanked Instructor John for everything he did for him. The boy understood that, not without his help, he was now moving to the second year straight from Class D. John Red refuted our character's guesses, stating only that the orphan now has no way back. If the leader of the gang of saboteurs completes the course without incident, they will see each other again. The instructor had only one request to Lehan, that he would survive no matter how difficult it was for him. The main character promised to pass all the tests that would be prepared for him and again meet with the sergeant. John Red left the field, leaving our character alone with his thoughts. In the evening, all four of them met with their things collected to go to the medical building to administer the drugs. Dmitry was the happiest of them all. He was in a hurry to quickly get to the hospital and get to work. The main character asked again and clarified that they needed to go to the second medical building of the ARC. Kuro was very afraid of what would happen to them in the near future. Seeing the state of his friend, Lehan encouraged him, telling him not to worry because they were together, and our character will not leave him alone. The Japanese were very scared. The child knew that an operation would be performed on them to accelerate the development and growth of the body. Dmitry shouted that fear had big eyes and it was time for them to hit the road to new challenges. The tiger cub was happy that they would soon become adults. The guys found medical building number 2. They were already expected there. The boys were met by Sasha Gray, who will be watching them for 5 weeks. Lehan didn't expect that they would stay in this building for so long without training. The doctor explained that this is the time their bodies will develop. The guys will spend 2 weeks in an incubator, and the next 3 in rehabilitation. The guys thought together that they would have to stay in some strange thing for 14 days. The main character turned to his comrades with a serious expression. Then he smiled, raised his hand, and said that he would see him in a couple of weeks. The guys looked at him with a smile. They wanted to quickly see what they would become. The main character extended his hand to his friends, as many bands or sports teams do before going on stage or playing. The guys reached their hands towards his hand. Sasha Gray watched all this with a smile. She was curious what the baby was like for whom Sergeant Red was fighting so hard. From what she saw, she realized that he really was different from the others. Del Simon was the only one who didn't reach out to the guy's hands. He thought it was childish and too childish. Doctors watched as the nutrient solution was administered. Kuro and Simon to breathe, but they endured it with dignity. Even Dmitry felt somehow uneasy when he lowered himself into the incubator. Lehan was no different from his classmates in this regard. He had difficulty breathing. The doctor understood that they could be claustrophobic, and every future soldier would have to go through this. The guys still need to be patient a little until they fall asleep. When the sleep process is complete, scientists will begin the operation. The first week has passed. Fortunately, there were no problems, but still, someone may have a difficult time undergoing surgery. Now they were interested in the question, if this continues, will the human race be able to continue to exist? Sasha's assistant Grace noticed that the doctor was very tired. The doctor suggested that the manager take some rest. Entering the restroom, the doctor was surprised. She did not expect to see her colleague again. The woman was wondering why John Red constantly comes to the medical building if he doesn't care about the children who are being trained. The sergeant, silently watching the woman, continued to smoke. In a second, he straightened out, smiled and said that it would be funny if such valuable students died because of her. Sasha Grey didn't like what the sergeant said, accusing her of causing children to die. The doctor assured the instructor that everything was going as it should. They have now begun the second phase of introducing the nutrient solution. It creates the power of a dragon's telekinesis by simply injecting a high-density liquid mixed with the dragon's heart. The sergeant understood that if he made the dragon's heart resonate, it would be easier to control the ability of telekinesis. This gave the instructor hope that Lehan would be able to reveal more of his abilities. Suddenly, Sasha Grace's bracelet alerted her that something terrible had happened. The woman immediately rushed to run to the research room, where there were incubators with students. John Red ran after her. He tried to find out from the doctor what happened. Something that no one expected happened. Lehan began to come to his senses. The guy had a sudden awakening. Now it will be very painful for him and hard to endure. He may not be able to bear the pain. Sasha Grace ordered the child's input process to be stopped immediately. The doctor wanted to turn off the switch, but the sergeant stopped her. The doctor was perplexed by the instructor's action. His student could have died. The girl turned to the sergeant so that he would not interfere with her. Otherwise, he would kill the guy. John Red forbade the doctor to interrupt the operation. The main character must go to the second year. Lehan coped with the challenges he faced during the operation. Now he was sitting in front of Sasha Grey, seemingly an adult and healthy young guy. The doctor was interested in whether everything was okay with our character. The head of the gang of saboteurs thanked her for worrying about him and said that thanks to her he felt good. The doctor admitted that this had never happened in her practice. This was the first time they had seen a telepath reject the insertions of a dragon's heart. The woman remembered how he began to regain consciousness and how she wanted to stop the process since he could have died. She demanded that they stop administering the solution. The doctor knew that the guy did not come to them thanks to his well-developed gift of telekinesis. John Red then stopped her and asked her to skip the psychic induction process and continue the operation. Lehan would survive no matter what, he believed in the guy. And the sergeant was right. Now this guy is the first and only case who was able to enhance only his physical qualities. The doctor wondered if he was okay, or if there might be some kind of organic rejection. The main character assured that he feels great and has no problems. He even joked that now at least he won't be kicked out of the ARC because of his grades. Sasha Grey noticed that the guy's psychological stability is simply amazing. Endurance and telepathy are directly dependent on each other. Why then are his extrasensory abilities weak, but his fortitude is great? The doctor released the student, but the thoughts of why this happened never left her. The woman believed that maybe this was all somehow connected with rejection. Lehan grew up. His body became like that of an adult. Even his facial features seemed less childish, but still he did not become what he wanted. The main character was met by Dimitri. A classmate was happy that the day had finally come when they all became sophomores. Del Simon was with the Tiger Cub. For these guys, everything went great without any force majeure situations. The main character noticed that 5 weeks had already flown by, and they hadn't noticed them at all. All the guys have changed a lot. Kuro has changed the most. Now he was not so small that everyone mocked him. Now a handsome tall guy stood in front of them. Lehan was glad that his comrades were all safe and sound. Del Simon was annoyed that the main character stood out again. He thought he was special, and the guy didn't like it, that someone stood out and was more interesting than the Englishman. Dimitri decided to curtail this behavior of Simon during puberty, but our character did not pay attention to the blonde. He knew that attitude towards himself. Our heroes went to the sophomore dorms. There is no particular difference from the first course, except that the exercises are carried out in detachments. Each squad consists of 4 to 10 people. At that time, there were 12 sophomores in ARC. In the squad with Lehan, there will be Kuro and 7 other guys. Entering his room, the main character could not believe that now he would have his own personal room. This is his first room in which only he will live in his entire life. The head of the detachment was Kato Swoki. He looks like a nice guy, but time will tell whether he really is like that. The guy warned that although there are many disciplines on the course, you need to focus on 3 main ones. This includes fire training, air combat, and battle simulation. Lehan knew that modern weapons were quite effective when fighting monsters. Among the monsters known to students are those with low intelligence, an ogre, a grant, and a werewolf. And their commander Ella has a fairly developed intellect. She uses telekinesis on par with warriors. Our hero was worried about the question that if Ella uses her abilities, the weapon will be useless. Unfortunately, it was true. Weapons cannot help against telekinesis. Only the demoness cannot use telekinesis endlessly. If she uses it constantly, there will be little left of her when the power runs out. Kato continued that fire is important, but aerial combat and simulated combat are more important, since in them the units compete with each other. He explained that a simulated battle is a training conducted in an artificially created arc arena. Home target is that you need to capture the flag that is located at the enemy base. In these competitions, it's all about strategy and the individual skills of each student. And such training is very dangerous. Even if weapons are not used, all participants have a chance of dying. Air combat for the second year takes place on airboards. It's easy to beat your opponents in this competition, but there should always be supports in the rear. They are the ones who control most of the boards with the help of their abilities. They either help move them or strike the enemy, depending on the situation. Kato said that before there were no strong telepaths in their squad, but now Kuro has been assigned to them. They have nothing to fear. He is considered one of the best. The guy was pleased and not used to hearing this from someone other than Lehan. The head of the detachment believed that the child could handle it, but Kuro found it difficult to answer him. Kato's friend didn't like that Kuro couldn't respond to his friend's words. The guy rudely said that no one is interested in his opinion, and if the team needs his skills, then he must do everything for the team. Lehan answered instead of his friend, saying that naturally he would cope, but there was no need to scold him. The Hulk attacked the main character with an order to shut his mouth and not blather, since he was a nobody here. Kato reassured his six, saying that since Han was right about something. Moreover, they are new. It's only their first day in the squad and they still don't know much, so they have everything to learn and understand ahead of them. The leader emphasized that even though our character is in the same class with them, the others have much more experience, so he should be quiet and not disturb the captain. Kato didn't like the main character because he was overpraised and special, which couldn't be said about him. With all his appearance, the captain showed how unpleasant the leader of the gang of saboteurs was to him. He even said that Lehan was in their squad only because Kuro had excellent abilities, and he needed him to win. And since Lehan and Kuro were always together, they could not be separated. He had to take both of them into the squad. Since the main character had the lowest level of telekinesis, no one expected much from him. Now his main task was not to prevent the team from winning thanks to Kuro. The squad supported the commander's insults against Lehan. They couldn't even imagine what this guy was capable of. Kato intended to make sure that the guy quickly left his squad since he considered him ballast for himself. The main character understood what his captain was getting at. He extended his hand for a handshake and assured that he would make every effort to avoid being seen. Gritting his teeth, Kato extended his hand to our character. They shook hands, but both felt dislike for each other. The captain was sure that Lehan would not last long. He would do everything to ensure that this guy abandoned his squad. For himself, the main character set a goal to hold out as long as necessary. After an unpleasant meeting, Lehan decided to wash away all the bad things that happened to him that day. After taking a shower, our character came to his senses a little. Immediately and without rest, the newly transferred sophomores went to the training ground. At the first training session, they were given a firearm. The newly minted second-year students had not trained with it before. Our character showed his ability to control this type of firearm without any problems. Kato decided to test the main character in shooting not just from a standing position at targets, but in battle. Lehan went into battle with other members of the squad. The head of the team watched him closely all the time. Having shot at the leader of the gang of saboteurs, the leader had to be praised a little, like the other participants. Our character thought that this guy even provides moral support to the students. For some time, the main character even changed his initial attitude about his commander. Everything returned to normal when Kato shouted to Kuro that it took him a long time to start shooting. The Japanese could not figure out the machine gun that he was given for training. Lehan noticed how the leader of the squad was ashamed of his classmate for such inability. The main character stood and watched as the dissatisfied Kato moved away from him towards his friend. Our character understood that he was still behind everyone else. He believed that he was still very far from being recognized by his own detachment. The leader of a gang of saboteurs thought a lot about how to make himself known so that they would start to reckon with him. Coming out of the shower, our character was already waiting for the head with his six to talk. Kato decided that in the battle they had to go through, Lehan would be on the bench. During a simulated battle, the team must have a minimum number of fighters. In the 7th detachment, the captain believed that there were already many excellent masters of hand-to-hand combat. Therefore, they don't need Lehan this time. The entire second year will be watching the competition at the training ground. He can also be there if he wants to watch their winnings. Lehan received a photo message from Major Kang of his brothers whom he was taking care of. The main character was glad that everything was fine with them. Finally, his kids live in abundance and do not starve. They have their own beds and go to school. All the sophomores gathered to watch the Capture the Flag competition. The 3rd and 9th squads took part. Kato laughed that the 3rd squad was new and the opponents needed to watch out for telekinesis. The main character realized that if among these guys there are newcomers with telekinesis, then it is definitely Del Simon. And so it was, our character was not mistaken. There really was a blonde guy in the squad. There was talk among the students at the training ground that his abilities were a brilliant telekineticist, and his opponents were really unlucky. Everyone knew about the capabilities of the new sophomore, and he was considered a very strong opponent. The 9th detachment was dissatisfied. They believed that their rivals were completely out of their minds, since they wanted to attack head-on. The head of the 3rd detachment was confident in his genius. With him, they knew that they would get victory. Del Simon was naturally confident in his abilities. He directly told his opponents that they were powerless against his power, and he would easily take the flag from them. The 9th squad was unhappy that their rivals were using telekinesis. They wanted the blonde to attack them without his superpowers. Simon was not going to listen to anyone. The guy simply took the weapon from another squad using his telekinesis skills. In appearance, his powers were very powerful. It was a pleasure to watch him work. The weapons of the entire 9th squad were in the air. There was no way they could pick them up and use them. Looking at how the blonde controlled his powers, the opponents could not believe what he was doing and how to do it. Immediately after taking the weapon, Del attacked his opponents. Clearly, victory was on his side. The leader of the 3rd detachment shouted to his wards that now they need to engage in battle. The blonde's mission was completed 100%, or even more. Simon's entire team rushed to attack the opponents with great enthusiasm. Defeating classmates without weapons was not difficult. The captain of the 3rd squad reached and took the flag of the opposing team. He was proud that they didn't even have to strain to win. After training the other squads, Kato spoke with Kuro about how important the role of a telepath is. He believed that they had similar schemes. Therefore, if the Japanese are on their team, they can win. The guy stood and listened to everything that the head of the detachment told him. All the time he was afraid to say a word to him. Lehan stood up for his friend. He knew his comrade very well, and had a completely different opinion than his team mentor. The main character noticed that the 9th squad, which will be their rivals, does not take into account the terrain and does not think about tactics. Therefore, you should rely only on the strength and skills of the fighters. Our character wanted to continue and tell us what he had noticed in their opposing team, and how, in his opinion, it would be possible to beat them. Kato really didn't like that the new guy behaved this way and considered himself better. But still, he gave him the opportunity to begin to speak his mind. The head of the detachment believed that Lehan wanted to take his place and told him so directly. After that, our character understood the reason why the guy hates him so much. The head of the detachment did not want to hear anything more from the main character. He clearly showed his hatred for him. 6. Kato called the leader of the gang of saboteurs to talk personally without unnecessary ears. He wanted to say something important to the main character. This time he didn't even show his hostility, as he did at the first meeting. Classmates left the training ground, where the second-year students watched the battles of their opponents. 6. Kato admitted that Lehan was an outstanding fighter. This was even recognized by the head of their squad. Only the entire squad believes that our character has no place in studying with them. The main character realized that the head had kept him in check all this time. This was not news to him. He wondered why he didn't fit into their team. 6 admitted that the whole point is that the young man is not afraid to contradict Kato during training. Sometimes you even get the impression that Lehan would have done a better job as a squad leader. Unfortunately, only one person can be the head of a squad. If the main character had put a little more pressure on their leader, he would have become very angry, and there might have been a split among the group. Since they have a boss, our character does not dare to contradict him. And when there is a distribution among squads, it's generally better for him to transfer to another one. Lehan realized that it would be better for him to do this. There is no better solution to this problem than transferring. Now the main character realized that he must gain trust among the students. And with his tips, he encroached on the authority of the detachment leader. That is why there was such hatred towards him. After the conversation, our character firmly decided to write an application for transfer to another unit. The young man decided not to delay for long and immediately went to the building to see the instructor. The leader of the gang of saboteurs gave his statement to Wei Chen. The instructor carefully studied his request and asked if his student was sure of his desires. Lehan's answer was yes. The translation was very important to him, and he would not regret his request. Instructor Chen supported his favorite. If his decision is final, then the guy will need to wait some time while his application is reviewed. Teachers need to discuss this issue in a meeting. Returning to his room, the main character thought that it was good for him that the consideration of his petition would take several weeks. He has time to focus on personal training rather than team training now that he is free. And while the instructors decide his fate, the guy needs to learn about each unit and decide what to do next. Lehan's thoughts were interrupted by Kuro, who came to him to spend free time together. A friend asked what he was talking about with the deputy head of the detachment in private. Our character said it doesn't matter, and he immediately hurried to inquire how the preparations for the air battle were going. Kuro shared that he can control 4 boards at the same time. Our character asked only his comrade could own boards, but the friend replied that together with the people standing on them, the main character was happy for his friend. He knew that his skills would grow quickly in this course. If the comrade is right, Then Kuro was now one of the strongest second-year students in telepathy. Lehan, as always, supported him and told him not to be afraid. He will root for the guy. Kuro needed these words of encouragement. Our character knew his friend very well and said only what he needed. It was the turn of the 7th squad to undergo aerial training. The second-year students who were watching them were talking about how there was someone very strong and tough in their squad. They had already heard about Kuro's power. Lehan listened with pleasure and pride to how others spoke of his friend and with what respect. Looking at the screen, the main character believed in the Japanese and knew that he could handle everything. The troops took their positions and prepared for battle. Kato turned to Kuro and asked him to take care of his team. The Japanese was determined not to let his team down, because they believed in him and trusted him. Since the 7th squad was fighting against the 1st and their training was an air battle, the purpose of such a battle was to learn how to work with airboards. Everyone knew that dragons fight mostly in the air, since almost all of them can fly. For a warrior, the best thing in battle, together with a jetpack and a hook cable, will be an airboard. Some of them even have firearms. In aerial combat, one person can operate 2 airboards at the same time. He uses one board to move, and the second to damage the enemy. The team has a support position. He is the main fighter in this training. He only works with the other team's airboards and takes control as much as his strength allows, so others concentrate on the battle. Lehan understood that the support position was perfect for Kuro, and he could control 4 airboards at the same time. There was just a small problem. Kato ordered his squad to march and stick to the plan. If they act as agreed, they will definitely win. He was sure that victory would be very easy for them. Hearing the command of the head of the detachment, the participants rushed into battle. The 1st detachment also did not wait long and immediately ran to the attack. The deputy leader of the squad believed that the rivals would move forward carefully, as their captain had told them. At the beginning of the battle, the movements of the 1st detachment were all as predicted by the 7th detachment. At first, the 1st detachment walked together, and then they went in different directions. Unfortunately, they did not yet know that their opponents knew about their movements in advance. This is exactly what the members of the 7th squad were preparing for. The sophomores who were part of the 7th squad began to knock out their opponents from the battle. The first one flew away, now there is one less. Kato was confident in his predictions, and the start of the battle provided confirmation that his plan was correct. The opponents were knocked out of the battlefield one by one. Everything went according to plan. Among those watching, conversations began that the battle had just begun, and 2 participants from the 1st detachment had already been knocked out. The sophomores found the 7th to be very strong. They had the impression that they knew in advance where the enemy would move. Kuro had the main role in this battle. The 1st squad did not have a strong support, unlike the 7th, so each fighter will control his own airboard. The Japanese had to take control of the boards of Kato and his deputy. And besides, the guy still needed to use the ability to see the future so that they knew about the enemy's movements. Kuro was frightened by this situation. He didn't have it. He had to figure out what they wanted from him and carry out the order. Zam believed that he and Kato were excellent fighters in close combat, so they took on the task of scattering their opponents. Lehan, having listened to the plan of the head of the detachment, understood that he had a chance of success. In theory, this is true, but in practice, it is not a fact. Satisfied with their intelligence, the 7th squad set off for training. It was very difficult for Kuro. He was always afraid of making a mistake, because he knew that if he screwed up, he would let the team down, and he would be held responsible for the loss. The guy controlled the boards with concentration and looked into the future of his opponents. Another opponent was knocked out of the battle. The 7th squad was winning. Only 2 students remained from the 1st squad. Everyone else was knocked out. Those who remained did not believe that the opponents were always so strong. Unlike their rivals, Kato's squad was in full force. The head of the 1st squad understood that they needed to deal with the support, and only then would they be able to win. The guys decided to act according to Plan A, which they approved before the fight. The student immediately began to carry out the approved conspiracy. The second one also did not stand idle for long. He immediately rushed to attack after his friend. Kato shouted to his subordinates to move forward. He couldn't believe that the opponents would just go head-on like that. The plan of the 1st detachment included more than just a frontal attack. They had a different goal, which Kato didn't even think about. One of the competitors flew over the opponents and headed towards his objective. The thug was caught by Kato and his deputy. They were focused only on him. The others did not bother them. This was the main mistake. The second student made his way straight to the support, and no one stopped him. One of the fighters wanted to stop him, but Kuro decided that they needed him more and should not leave them anywhere, but rather help fight the huge guy. Kato believed that he needed to help him so that they would not be reset, rather than fulfill his mission and protect the support from the enemy. This is exactly what the 1st detachment needed, so that everyone leaves Kuro alone. Lehan understood the mistake of his chief. They had to leave the guard, otherwise his friend would now be cut off from them, and they would lose. Even at the meeting, Kato ordered the 4th and 8th Airboards to defend Kuro. During the battle, he forgot about it. For him, his own defense was more important. Now in battle, the opponent was approaching the support of the 7th Squad, who was completely alone and had no opportunity to respond to him in battle. Seeing his opponent in front of him, Kuro thought about where the 4th and 8th, which should have been next to him, went. Left alone with the enemy, the Japanese understood that he would now be neutralized. It was not difficult for the fighter from the 1st Squad to fight one-on-one with Kuro. The brute was defeated by 3 opponents. But he was not upset, because he understood that his comrade was already at the goal, and it would not be difficult for him to do everything as they had agreed. The 7th Squad was pleased with itself. The head and his deputy did not even suspect that they had fallen into a trap that they had made for themselves, moving away from the plan and putting their interests above the team. Another student from the 1st Squad was removed from the battlefield. Finally, it dawned on Kato what had just happened behind them while they were dealing with the enemy. Kuro lay unconscious. The last of the 1st detachment defeated him. The guy was pleased with himself and the way his squad fought. At that same second, all the boards and their owners, who were controlled by the support, flew down. The second-year students discussed that Kuro was great for being able to control 2 airboards, but even he was exhausted, and in a one-on-one battle, he could not win. Lehan assumed that this would be the end of it. If Kato didn't rely entirely on Kuro and his telekinesis, then this wouldn't have happened. No matter how hard the support tried, it was difficult for him to work alone without a friend. When the last of the remaining members of the 1st Squad approached Kuro, he did not expect to see such a sight. What he saw greatly surprised the guy. He realized how strong his opponent was in telepathy. At that time, boards began to explode in the air. It all happened because Kuro made a small mistake and lost control over them. The student of the 1st Squad was glad that he was able to neutralize the supports. Apparently, Kuro was under enormous pressure from his classmates, and therefore made a mistake. The 1st Squad won. The main character didn't like this at all. If Kato had accepted him into the team, this would not have happened. He would never have left Kuro alone, as the head of the squad did. Lehan understood that if he were a squad leader, he would not make such mistakes. 3 weeks have passed since the application was submitted. Our character was called by Instructor Wei regarding his request. The instructor's application was reviewed and approved, and now he can be the head of the new squad. Lehan understood that the teachers gave him a chance to prove himself once again by approving his request. Wei Chen continued that since the guy showed himself in the 1st year, the instructors unanimously decided to give him a chance. This will be a test of his charisma and reputation. Lehan received conditions for creating a new detachment. There were only 2 of them, which means that in a detachment there must be at least 4 people including the leader, and from other detachments he is allowed to take 1 fighter from each. Those chosen have the right to refuse transfer. The guy understood that if he followed these points, he would become enemy number 1 for all the heads as soon as he began to act. Now we had to prepare so as not to miss out on the most talented guys. If Instructor Wei said he could do it, then so be it. Our character won't let him down. Wei Chen was glad that his student understood everything quickly and was looking forward to his results. Great hopes and trust were placed in Lehan. He couldn't believe that he would now have his team. When creating their squad, Kuro and Jose were the first to come to mind. Kuro first. It would be great if he agreed, and if their friend was also in the 2nd year. But he had not yet been transferred from the 1st to them. The main character understood all the responsibility, and that if he started taking someone away, they would be considered traitors. Not everyone accepted it and would agree to switch to it. Our character was thinking about who else he could take to the team, and remembered another classmate whom he would like to see on his team. Without delay, he headed to his room. The student immediately opened the door to the leader of the gang of saboteurs. The guy could not even imagine what his comrade had come to him with. Dmitri thought that something had happened, that his classmate had come to see him. Kato was greatly distressed by the events that had occurred over the past weeks. Their squad constantly lost, and for this it was natural that he blamed Kuro, and not himself or anyone else. The deputy also supported him, saying that when there was a transfer, it was necessary to take Della Simon into the detachment. During the time they were in their 2nd year, the blonde showed himself impeccably. His telekinesis and martial arts skills were impeccably honed. Lehan heard his friends discussing this, and how Kuro with his skills was useless to them in the same conditions. If they don't find a replacement for him, then they will have to constantly play him as a support, which means they will constantly lose. Dmitri was glad to hear that Lehan was allowed to create his own squad. The Tiger Cub wondered who else he was going to call. Naturally, the person Han wanted on the team was Kuro. He always wanted to work with a friend. Dima suggested that not a single leader would agree to give his fighter to another commander. The main character was waiting for the guy from Siberia to answer what he thought about moving to him. Dmitri thanked him for such an offer, but he could not leave the detachment. This amounted to betrayal of his teammates. The main reason for the refusal was that in the 5th detachment the leader was a Tiger Cub. and he could not refuse such a position. Lehan did not know that his comrade had been chosen as the team commander. Now he understood. He could not be offended by Dima. He made his decisions. Dmitri, of course, wanted to somehow support the main character, but he didn't know how. And so I felt a little guilty. The tiger cub thought about it and suggested that his friend do something for them. He believed that it was better for them to remain rivals. After all, before they always competed to be better, and this gave them strength. Lehan supported his comrade in this proposal. They truly were worthy opponents. Their rivalry was healthy and not based on envy like many others. The comrades agreed to meet on the battlefield. Dmitri even promised that, if possible, he would break 2 of Lehana's arms. Rumors quickly spread among the sophomores that the main character decided to create his own squad. No matter how they called him names, all obscene words were addressed to him. Only no one dared to say this to his face, but only behind his back. After the heads of the squads found out that our character was assembling his team, they all began to look at him like a wolf and watched him. Kato, who wanted Lehan to leave his squad, now believed that he had a knife stuck in his back. The head of the 7th was never ready to give Kuro to the main character. He told him this, openly and in front of everyone. He believed that it would be better for the orphan to leave the arc altogether rather than play with them. The Japanese could not say a single word. Nobody knew about his thoughts. Lehan knew that under the leadership of Kato Kuro he would never reveal his talent, and he told him this directly. Only the head of the squad believed that the main character thought that he was the smartest, but this was not the case. The captain wanted the Japanese to become the best fighter in their group, and believed that he would do so. Our character answered sharply that the commander would ask the enemy to wait to start a war until his support revealed his strength. And with him, Kuro can become a better fighter very quickly. Orphan, reminded that the leader's task is to win even with limited forces. Nothing will change if you blame someone other than yourself for your defeat. This was a prick for the 7th squad, since their commander blamed everyone, but not himself. Kato was furious. He grabbed Lehan and shouted at him to shut up. He wouldn't get Kuro anyway. The main character was of the opinion that it was not for them to decide, but for the Japanese. Only he has the right to decide who to be in the squad with. At that same moment, the commander of the 7th turned to the Japanese. He threatened in front of witnesses that if he left, he would kill him himself. Lehan decided not to back down and said that Kato could only talk. Even if he drowns or dies in some other way, he will still scratch his tongue all the time. After hearing this, the commander could not restrain himself and hit our character. The main character did not expect the attack and did not have time to react and respond. Lehan looked at his opponent and answered with dignity that he did not even want to get his hands dirty with him in a fight. Now they have become even bigger rivals. Kato began to hate and despise the main character even more. Passing by Kuro, our character managed to tell him that he would be waiting. Everyone considered the orphan crazy, since he left the detachment for the sake of something that did not exist. But the young man knew that if he could not assemble his squad, he would pay dearly for it. Kuro watched his friend leave. The guy was wondering what to do. He faced a serious choice. Lehan talked to everyone he wanted. The decision was not up to him. The student did not know what to do next. The main character, lost in thought, encountered a stranger in a mask. He saw him for the first time. Our character was surprised by the speed with which the student rushed past him. Since the stranger was wearing a mask, the guy wondered if it was possible to dress like that in the ARC. The young man wanted to say something, but before he could, his bracelet beeped, and so his attention switched to the message he had received. The heads of all detachments were gathered in front of Medical Building Number 2. Sasha Grace was already waiting for the group commanders. She had good news for them. She brought with her 6 newcomers who needed to be distributed among squads. The doctor allowed Lehan to choose first, since he had just created his own squad and needed fighters. This was a chance for the main character. He needed to get at least one new student at all costs. Our character came out of the ranks and introduced himself. He invited those who wanted to come to him, saying that he did not have enough participants. Other heads began to laugh and claimed that he had no one but himself. One of the newcomers immediately expressed a desire to join Lehan's squad. Lehan was delighted when he saw who wanted to join him in the group. It was Jose, a friend with whom they survived on a desert island. After distribution, all the new students were sent to their rooms. The friends reasoned together that it would be great if at least one more person came to them. But some newcomers have not yet made a choice. The main character thanked Jose for believing in him and joining. The young man will try with all his might not to let him down. He always wanted to be on a team with his first prefect. The newcomer replied that those who refused to join him did not understand which commander they had not lost. They just don't know what he's capable of. The guys decided that it was time to rest, because tomorrow they need to start working hard. Jose prepared to go to his room. Suddenly he was stopped by a knock on the door. Someone came to see Lehan. Opening the door, the main character saw Kuro in front of him. The Japanese man's face was bruised. It was clear that he had been beaten. The beatings were the consequences that Kato gave him after the guy decided to leave the 7th squad. The main character was stunned. He was not sure that exactly his friend, whom he knew before, was standing in front of him. Jose noticed that the team from the desert island is now together again, and now they can handle everything. Suddenly, another newcomer came into the room asking him to join them. It seemed to him that something funny was happening with them. The stranger asked if our character knew that everyone in his second year called him a traitor, and he assumes that he will be most interested in the 13th detachment. Jose asked his friend if he remembered this student, because in his first year he was also in Class B. The main character replied that naturally they need such talent. This new guy was Knut Mayer. He went through survival training with them on a desert island. The golden-haired one said hello and asked if it was possible to join them in the detachment. Lehan confirmed, but also reminded that they were not on good terms with other units, and if something went wrong, they could be disbanded. The young man tried to make sure that everyone knew what would follow, but Kuro and Knut were determined to become part of the protagonist's team. They were not afraid of difficulties. They trusted him. This foursome had a great responsibility. The main character was confident in himself and his comrades. The guy knew that they could handle everything. Now the 13th squad was fully assembled and could fully begin diligent training. The next morning, the new detachment in full force was called to meet the teacher. In front of them stood second-year senior instructor Grossman. Lehan introduced himself to him in response as the head of the detachment. The next people the leader introduced were Jose Batista and Knut Meyer. Grossman drew attention to Kuro, whose face was covered in bruises. The Japanese replied that he had fallen down the stairs. What he heard surprised the teacher. Naturally, the man understood what the second-year student was hiding from him, but he did not reveal that he knew the cause of such abrasions. He just asked to be more careful in the future. The instructor announced that they were given 3 weeks for the preparatory period, since their squad had just been formed and included all newcomers, after which the team will participate in competitions on an equal basis with the rest. Therefore, the guys need to try hard and prepare. The competitions themselves and opponents will be randomly selected. Lehan felt that their teacher was underestimating them too much. The first competition for the 13th squad was Path of Survival, and the opponent was the 9th squad. The opponents consisted of strong shooters and had the largest number of victories in such training. Mayer barely survived on the battlefield. He didn't like what was happening at all, and he even believed that it was not his thing. If he can't hit, he might be better off just going to the bench. Lehan jumped up to him and shouted that he wanted to die. Knut quickly recovered from the captain's scream. The main character ordered not to even think about giving up, no matter what situation he was in. Our character will not allow any of his team to die. The squad will work according to the mobile bunker strategy. The name of the plan even made the guys want to laugh, but no one laughed. Each team prepared for battle. The time to start has come. The 9th squad had a desire to finish off their opponents as quickly as possible. They considered them not their rivals. The commander of the 13th detachment believed that victory would be theirs. All the second years watching the battle supported the 9th squad and were determined that they'd deal with the traitors. Dmitri stood and watched with interest. He believed that such popularity was what his comrade needed. Del Simon, who was also among the spectators, understood that there would be no winners in this battle. He wanted to see how Lehan would perform as the head. The participants in the battle came out of their hiding places and went to look for their opponents in the forest. The 9th detachment moved further and looked closely into the bushes, but they did not see anyone from the opponents. Knut looked at his opponents and realized that they were approaching him faster than he expected. Main received a message that Kerr sees the enemy and he has 200 meters left to find him. The golden-haired man waited with dignity for his rivals. He had to fulfill the instructions of the head. Lehan was also not very happy that the enemy was approaching quickly. Jose complained that the 9th squad didn't even give them a break. The 13th group had enough time to prepare, but not enough time to regroup. The main character thought that Knut was able to understand the situation, or they would be caught up and nothing would work out. The riflemen from the 9th detachment went on the attack and began shelling. Knut tried to run away from his opponents, screaming. Main, running away, no matter how hard he tried to dodge, still caught a bullet. No matter how much it hurt him, the guy still tried to lead his opponents to the right place. Turning around, the golden-haired man saw 2 guys catching up with him. The whip turned around and began shooting at the opponents. The young man hoped to shoot at least one of them. The 9th squad believed that they had already won and were thinking about who would take down this new guy. The response to his flying bullets knocked Knut off his feet. He understood that he was covered with gunfire and he could not cope with them alone. Main hid behind a tree, although he was wounded in his leg, but he hoped that everything would continue to go according to plan, and he would soon join his squad. He just needs to buy some more time. The 9th detachment was alarmed by the fact that there was only one enemy. They only have a team of 4 people, and there is no point in sending a scout. Whatever it was, The opponents expected to finish and win the battle with a shootout. The head of the ninth asked his teammates to cover him and go on the offensive. At this time, Lehan had just completed all preparations for the execution of his plan. The time has come for them to move forward. Knut was able to buy enough time for his group. The main character believed that perhaps their comrade was already wounded, and he also assumed that the opponents decided not to unite and act, but to wait for them. The guys have gained strength, now they are strong and able to resist the enemy. They were also able to fell a tree using telekinesis and fire. The time has come to show what the 13th squad is capable of. At the training ground, everyone was confused about what the new guys had done and why they had knocked down the tree. How did they even manage to do this? And now they are hiding behind a log. Simon and Dmitri immediately realized that this was done to protect Kuro. Looking at each other, the former teammates were shocked that their thoughts were the same. Knut was determined and once again began to shoot at the enemy. The guy had run out of bullets. He urgently needed a reload. Main did not have time to reload the machine gun. An opponent approached him and pointed his weapon at him. The enemy saw that he was really alone. The ninth squad thought that he was luring them into a trap, but it turned out that this was just an improvisation on the fly. The tiger cub reasoned out loud that he had already knocked out one of the new ones from the squad, and now Khan only had a tree in the form of a shield as protection. It was interesting to see if they could resist the old-timers in this way. Simon noticed that there was one weakness in the tactics. He sincerely believed that Lee knew about it. The tree with part of the 13th group was approaching the 9th. The opponents were perplexed that in front of them, no matter how hard they tried, they could not stop it. In the 9th squad, everyone was an excellent shooter, but there was not a single strong telepath to strike back. The leader was afraid that Lehan already knew this, and now it would not be difficult for him to defeat them. The enemies began to lose, and in order to somehow stall for time and come up with a new plan, they wanted to head for shelter. The head ordered to delay time so that the new recruits would exhaust themselves. Naturally, Lehan knew about the weaknesses, and that's why he came up with a wooden shield that would help him buy time. Everything was done so that Jose could use his firepower. The plans of the 13th detachment came to fruition. A flame appeared in the forest right in front of the rivals. Through the smoke, the opponents had difficulty seeing and had difficulty breathing. The second-year students who watched the training saw for the first time that one of the participants had fire, and now the old-timers were choking on smoke. There was enough smoke for the 9th squad to see something. Now it was necessary to take care of those who managed to escape from the flames. There were 2 such craftsmen, but they didn't breathe fresh air for long. A member from the 13th group immediately began shooting at the escapees. 2 of the 9th squad dropped out of the competition, but those who remained were sure that their opponents, like them, did not see anything, and they went unnoticed. To their great regret, they were mistaken and were immediately shot down. Kuro's ability to see the future, the team saw everything and everyone on the battlefield. Lehan eliminated the remaining members of the 9th Division from the competition without much trouble. The first battle of the 13th detachment was won by them. There was a lot of surprise in the hall. Everyone was stunned by Kuro's powers and how the main character turns out to be an excellent shooter. Dmitri was sincerely happy for his comrade's victory. He believed in him, and knew that he would be an excellent leader for his team. Simon could not come to terms with the fact that the team showed such an excellent result, and surprised everyone with their abilities. Jose and Kuro couldn't get enough of their first victory with this lineup. Lehan always believed in his comrades. He knew that they were capable of much together, and that no one was afraid of them. The detachment was able to show that they were no worse than the others as they were previously thought. Instructor Grossman watched the entire competition with interest. He needed to know what a new guy was like who was not afraid and went against everyone. The teacher now realized that Lehan was not an ordinary student. The 13th squad celebrated its first victory. The guys had a special dinner for the winners. On this day, they could afford it. Only they themselves knew what the first victory was worth to them. One of the students was shot, so he needed time to rehabilitate. Now they have gathered to relax and unwind together. The time has come for the head of the squad to say his words because it was he who led his team to victory. The main character thanked his comrades. He admitted that his tactics were very aggressive, and they were able to win only because they acted together, and not thanks to any plans or strategies. Mutual understanding is the most important thing for them. The guys were proud of their commander. It was clear that they believed in him, and he would not let them down. Kuro protested about the plan. He believed that what he had come up with was not aggressive, but very cool. Our character justified himself that they were all just lucky, that their opponents had physical strength and their tactics were understandable. Therefore, the main character immediately understood who would take what position in battle. Knut was amazed at Khan's ability to read his opponent. The guy was once again convinced that he had made the right choice when dividing into groups. Meyer was so happy and laughing that he immediately felt sick in 1 second. The wound had not healed and was still very bothersome. Batista asked his friend to lie down and rest rather than sit with them. But the golden-haired man had a different opinion. He believed that even a dying person should not miss such a feast. The 13th squad laughed heartily all evening and spent time like true friends. Grossman was thinking hard about something in his office. The instructor was amazed how the 13th were able to defeat the 9th squad, which was considered one of the strongest. The teacher decided to crush the new team. He believed that the guys would think too much about themselves, and the best enemy for them will be the 7th squad. Grossman understood that Kato would do everything to destroy the traitors, but at the same time, he understood that the 7th squad might lose. The instructor decided to arrange everything so that the 13th squad would lose to the former leader. The night after the battle, Lehan cannot sleep. Insomnia has long tormented the main character, but before it was due to the fear of flying out of the ARC. But now he has the best partners, and he has nothing to fear. You won't be expelled from the second year for bad grades. You can only leave if you die. Our character tried to convince himself that it didn't matter who their opponent would be. They would win anyway. The second battle was the Battle of the Captains. The 1st and 13th squads competed. The rivals, preparing for the start of the battle, made sure that everyone remembered the plan according to which they would act. Their main goal was to keep an eye on Jose and Kuro. The abilities of this couple were considered one of the strongest among second-year students. The members of the first squad were confident in themselves. They believed that even though they had better abilities, they would still give them such a thrashing that they would be unable to use them. The leader of the enemies was confident in himself, and believed that they would easily neutralize those with superpowers. They decided to make a thug their captain, so that opponents could not take the armband from him, because they thought that they would not be able to do it. Simon and Dmitri watched Lehan together again. The Tiger Cub assumed that the guys began to hate the instructor too much, since he immediately after training with a firearm sent them to the next one, without allowing them to rest and prepare. According to the rules of the battle, you need to defeat the team captain with a headband. However, the first squad gave the ribbon to the monster, which even 3 people could not defeat. The first squad used the charging tank attack. According to their plan, the thug was chosen to be the commander, and the group would be able to hold off long-range attacks and destroy the enemy. Dmitri reasoned loudly and was interested in what his comrade would do. Simon, on the contrary, wanted to watch in silence, and mentally wished Dima to shut up. What the members of the first detachment saw led them into a huge stupor. They certainly weren't expecting such a setup. The bandage was on Kuro's head, near whom there were 2 students. The opponents could not find Lehan anywhere. The guys were at a loss. They didn't know at all what to do now after what they saw. Kuro was even more afraid than his rivals in misunderstanding. His comrades supported him and asked him not to be a coward. They would be able to protect him. The support just needs to execute his plan perfectly. The first squad decided that they needed to take action. Even if the head of the rivals hid, they still would not defeat them. The old men were self-confident and considered themselves already winners. The opponents launched an attack according to the plan they developed before the competition. Lehan calmly watched his enemies. They did as he expected. The main character stood on a tree and waited for the right moment. Everyone knew that in the Battle of Captains it was not necessary to destroy the entire team. The task involved defeating only one person with a headband. Kuro screaming to take the ribbon from him. Knut and Jose were ready to defend their current captain at all costs. Batista immediately used fire, but the enemy shouted back that it would not work on them like it did on others. The rivals met with dignity and began to fight with weapons. Despite the fact that little time had passed since the wound, Mayer was able to fight on par with the enemy. Lehan watched everything from a tree and waited for the right moment, with Kuro with their thoughts. Everyone was almost there. Now the main thing is that the team is ready for what they came up with. There was no need to worry about anything. The 13th squad was well prepared. It's time to surprise everyone again with your battle tactics. The main character jumped from the tree where he had been all that time. The bull did not see that they had already come down for him. The monster purposefully ran towards Kuro. Jose and Knut stood and were amazed at its size. Mayer and Batista raised their heads up to look at their commander and assess the real size of the thug. At that same moment, the monster with a bandage on his head picked up 2 comrades. They were like midgets in weight and size, which could not resist the giant in any way. The comrades from the first detachment were glad that everything worked out for their brute. Now he needed to hold those 2 until his friends got to the curse and neutralized the guy and took the bandage. Only it was already too late. The first team lost. Lehan was already flying towards them from the mountain. The necessary situation had already developed. Everything happened as the main character had calculated. The opponents approached the support. They sincerely believed that they had already won. Only Kuro was looking somewhere up and not at them. And he didn't pay any attention to the fact that his opponents were already near him. It finally dawned on the enemies that something was wrong. The students thought of finding where the support was looking so intently and what was happening there. Only they did not have time to do this, as they heard a strong roar behind them. It was as if something heavy had fallen from heaven. Turning to the place where something could have happened, the first detachment was horrified by what they saw. They never expected this. Behind them, a huge wall of dust formed, like after a bomb explosion. What was happening behind the white wall was not visible and nothing could even be assumed. They only realized that their captain was on the other side. The opponents realized that they had fallen into the trap of Lehan's team. Knut and Jose couldn't believe that the monster was lying unconscious on the ground. Kuro's telekinesis was able to neutralize the main enemy. Our character took the captain's armband. The competition is over. Without waiting, the first squad lost in a matter of minutes. The second-year students were surprised that the battle ended so quickly, and also with the victory of the 13th squad. Among the students, there were arguments that he really jumped from a tree whose height was approximately equal to a 5-story building. Many students thought Lehan was crazy, but at the same time they began to admire him. Dmitri listened to his fellow students and laughed, because even at the beginning of this battle they only spoke badly about his comrade, but now he had become cool for them. The tiger cub knew that it would cost Khan a lot to keep his face and show a wonderful result. The cheers did not subside. Everyone was wondering where he came from. And if he was previously in the 7th squad, why did he leave and not be involved in the training of the old squad to bring them victory? Kato watched the battle. He was furious. What infuriated him the most was that Lehan was able to truly unleash Kuro's abilities, and they constantly showed what no one expected from them. Compared to him, he seemed like a complete idiot for letting them both go. It turns out that the head of the 7th squad clearly did not understand anything about the abilities of the protagonist. The day before the battle with the first detachment, the 13th group developed a plan for victory, and our character has already trained to fly and jump from heights. Kuro, with the help of his telepathy, controlled his friend so that he would not break when falling, but would land in the right place. The main character completely trusted his friend in this battle. He believed that the Japanese would not let him down and nothing would happen to him. After finishing the training, Lehan thanked and praised Kuro. Now they won't have any problems in a real battle. They have honed everything and know where and how to act and what to do. The guys took a lot of risks coming up with such a plan and bringing it to life. If during training a young man gets away with only a broken nose, then in a real battle he could lose his life. It is very difficult to control a person with the help of telekinesis. If everyone could do it like Kuro, then all the fighters would already fly. According to the plan, Lehan will hide in a secluded place and wait for the moment to jump. The guys will have to make sure before starting everything that neither he nor the other team will suffer much from their plan. Unfortunately, everything did not happen as harmlessly as we wanted. After all, the main character broke his arm, and the Japanese blamed himself for this. Our character calmed him down and said that everything was fine, since he had a difficult task in front of him, but he still coped with it 100%. The guy had never heard such an apology addressed to him before. Whip asked Kuro not to blame myself, because exactly thanks to him they won. Jose decided to interrupt the discussion of his comrades, suggesting that until their captain's hand healed, they would not take part in team training. Unfortunately, the instructors had a different opinion about this group of guys. All of their arc bracelets lit up, and a new message arrived. All the boys were surprised to learn that they would have aerial training in 2 days. And their opponent will be none other than the 7th squad, from which Lehan and Kuro left. The head of the 7th squad was in a hurry. What bothered him was that they received a notification about the training. The guy wanted to discuss all this with the instructor since his opponent had problems with his hand. Grossman was already waiting for the commander of the 7th group. He knew that the guy would rush to him as soon as he found out about the competition. But still, when the instructor heard a knock on the door, he pretended that he did not think that his student would come to him. Having introduced himself, as required by the laws of the arcade, Kato began to speak. He didn't want such a battle, or rather, he didn't want a competition in which Lehan would be injured to take part. Most of the 13th squad were outraged that they were put into battle when the captain's arm was broken. Jose believed that this equated to an automatic loss. Batista did not let up. He wanted to go to management and explain everything. But even if they had gone to Grossman, nothing would have changed, since he did this on purpose so that the 7th squad would win. Since the instructor was not sure that they would be able to win if the main character was not injured. Despite the fact that the instructor believed that Sueki was not completely confident in his abilities, Kato wanted to explain to him that they would still have defeated the 13th squad. Even if everything was fine with the hand, they would have won. No matter how much he tried to explain himself to Instructor Kato, he still insisted that they must defeat the enemy this time and everything was specially done for this. Taking a deep breath, Sueki knew that he had no right to lose and he definitely wouldn't do it. The head went to his squad to train, although he was sure that they didn't really need it. They were considered one of the strongest. they would definitely win this competition. Lehan asked his comrades to stop wailing. Nothing would change from this. They now need to decide how to act to win. The commander admitted honestly that he did not have a strategy for winning, but he promised that he would definitely figure out how not to lose to the enemy. When the friends were discussing their upcoming game, Kato approached them. Sueki wanted to make Lehan a weakling and a talker, so he said that he hoped that it was not just his trepidation, and he was sure that the main character would not be able to defeat him with a broken arm. Our character was not at a loss, emphasizing that he could cope with both an injury and one arm in order to show his squad who was stronger and better. Lehan promised to prepare something special just for them. In order not to embarrass your opponent, you will need to try very hard in the battle. At these words, Kato became enraged and began to threaten that he would kill Lehan and Kuro. Sueki couldn't control his anger. He burned inside with anger and envy. Lehan hastened to remind him that he had never killed anyone in his life, so it was better for him not to throw such words around. Kuro couldn't give up or lose so easily. He shouted in anger that he would show him everything. Only Han needed to wait. In the eyes of the guys, the head of the 7th squad looked pitiful, and his behavior resembled a person who had problems with his head. The main character knew that it would definitely not be easy for them with this team, so he asked his friends to go to the gym and start training. In the hall, the 13th squad was training hard. Our character tried his best to control the airboard with one hand, and this was very difficult for him. Unlike the leader of the gang of saboteurs, everything worked out for the other guys. Lehan knew that this was a failure. Even with a healthy hand, it's difficult for him to control 2 boards. But here to work with one, it was out of reach for him. He had difficulty coping with one. Looking at his comrades, our character realized that he was not the only one with problems with control. It was also difficult for Jose. Controlling 2 boards and the flame at the same time was almost impossible. The main character understood that in this competition they could only count on Kuro, just as the 7th squad did with him before. The only difference was that the young man did not want to overload his friend, unlike Kato. Lehan knew that even without strong support, their opponents were well balanced in terms of physical strength and telekinesis, and their respect and trust in the leader and his abilities made them much stronger. One thing the main character knew for sure was that they could not win if they attacked head-on. The captain's thoughts were interrupted by Jose, who was having a serious and not very good conversation with him. Batista showed how he handles fire, not the board. The guy complained that there was nothing in the air that he could set on fire, so his ability here was completely useless. And if you take into account the speed of movement, it will be very difficult to even aim. Lehan thought intently about what his comrade said to him. Someone else was watching their training. The caretakers were upset that the guys spent most of their time chatting instead of working. Those who looked after the 13th squad were Kato and his deputy 6. Having assessed what they saw, the head of the 7th detachment and his deputy decided that they had nothing to worry about and would now definitely win the battle. Lehan believed that his team had no way to win, while Kato was confident that his squad had no reason to lose. The sophomores were shocked to see that competition had returned to the 13th squad so quickly, since everyone knew that the captain's arm was broken. The most difficult thing for them was that the air battle was their first. Dmitri watched what was happening and understood that the instructor did everything on purpose, since it was immediately clear that Lehan and his comrades would lose in this battle. Del Simon, again, like most of the time, had an idea, and what he was thinking about no one could understand. The tiger cub and the blonde man, as always, stood next to each other during battles. Whether they did this on purpose or not was not known. This time Dima stood behind Simon, and not from the side. Well, when he saw, he asked Dmitri to stand somewhere further away and not interfere with him watching the fight. All the students knew that Grossman was trying to give each team about a 50-50 chance of winning, and the type of training and teams were determined under the guise of information analysis. But no one understood why this battle had such participants. Simon knew that this time it would not be easy for Lehan. He was interested to see what his greatest rival would do in such a situation. The 7th squad appeared on the battlefield and was ready. The 13th also did not lag behind them. They were all waiting for the training to start. Most of all, Kato wanted to tear apart the opposing team and show what they do with traitors. The main character asked how Jose was feeling and whether he was ready for battle, to which he received the answer that he was ready to rock and rock like never before. In this battle, it is Batista who must take care of the captain. He is their main strategy, which no one even suspects. It's time to start the battle and launch airboards into the squads. The 7th group was ready to start, but quickly became speechless from what they saw. They stood like statues. No one expected this. In the hall, where all the second-year students were watching the battle, discussions began from what they saw about how crazy Lehan was and where they got so many airboards from. Now some people considered the whole team crazy. While Kato was counting the number of boards that were flying in the air near his opponents, he could not utter a word from shock. Lehan's team took 16 boards to practice. It was this number that surprised everyone without exception. Kato couldn't understand how this was possible, since the second-year fighters control 2 boards, and the support controls 4. But on the opposing team, some people can't cope with even 2. He couldn't believe that Kuro was controlling 10 of them. Lehan was pleased. He knew that his opponent was now standing in confusion. The main character also had something to explain to the former head of the squad in which he was originally. 7th squad was surprised quantity boards which was presented by opponents, and Lehan's team stood smug. They knew that now after the battle starts more, everyone's surprise. Rival team started between yourself reason or at all such maybe. Captain tried their calm down and asked not to worry earlier time. Kato ordered hold on plan. They must destroy enemies one after another. 13th squad took their positions to start the battle. On the boards were only Jose and Knut. Lehan and Kuro stood on solid basically. They had no plans to fly. The main character and his comrades continuously trained and they didn't have time to rest. Although capabilities telekinesis were below our character, learned average concentrate their strength in what you want point body. Young man understood that if he can howl this skill better than just monitoring objects using telekinesis, he will be able to control boards much faster. Having understood how to use his strength, the main character came up with a plan to defeat his rivals. The strength and speed with which our character directed boards to opponent was amazing. The 7th squad believed that this was madness on the part of the opponents. Even Kato believed that the speed with which the airboard was approaching them was enormous. Sueki could only react to the board until it reached the target. Unfortunately, not everyone on his team could do this. Only now, in addition to the board, another small surprise flew towards the enemy squad in the form of a fiery dragon launched by Jose. While preparing for the battle, Batista told the captain that his fire abilities would not be needed in the upcoming battle, since during an air battle, there are not many things that can be set on fire. Only the main character thought completely differently. The head of the detachment, on the contrary, made the superpower of fire the main one in the upcoming battle. Lehan shared with his friend that there was still something that could be set on fire. The item that was supposed to set Jose on fire was airboards. That's exactly what he did as the board approached its designated target during a dogfight. Del, Simon, and Dimitri looked at the screen and did not understand how their friend could think of such a thing. Discussions began in the hall about what it was all about, what they saw, and whether they understood correctly that the guys blew up the board. Everyone was wondering what the price of those boards was. Some have begun to speculate that the cost is more than an instructor's salary. As a result, most of the second-year students came to the same conclusion. What difference does it make, even if Lehan blows up all the boards and wins this battle? The main character worked in a team exclusively with Jose. The head of the squad launched the airboard, using his power, to ensure that it reached its destination as quickly as possible, where his comrade entered the game and blew up the board. The explosion was so powerful that those who were nearby had no chance of remaining in the air. The first explosion sent several members of the 7th squad flying down. Kato ordered his deputy to block, because if this continues, the opponents will blow up all their boards. Only the friend did not support the order of the head of the detachment. He believed that if they approached, he might hit them too. Grossman, having heard explosions during aerial training, immediately rushed to run towards the students. The instructor shouted and demanded that the guys stop immediately, but no one was going to listen to him. The teacher and Kato were furious with Lehan's idea. They couldn't even think that the guy would come up with such a thing. They just wanted to defeat him and teach him a lesson, but unfortunately, they greatly underestimated the main character, who made them a laughingstock. After the training, the instructor called Lehan into his office. The main character stood and did not understand why Grossman was silent and only glared at him. In this sense, it was much easier with Sergeant Red. John Red would simply scold him and let him go, but it's not clear what's going on in his head. The instructor was silent for a long time and then, without knowing how, he started a conversation. The first thing he asked was the price of the airboard. Our character replied that he knew that it was not a cheap thing, but he himself was never interested in its cost. The teacher began to appreciate that if the student were not a member of the ARC, he would have to pay for damage to property for the rest of his life. Lehan was surprised that he was called to ask for the price of some boards, and not to discuss battle tactics. The instructor didn't want to talk about it because he couldn't imagine anything for him, since technically no rules were broken. The main character's prank caused a lot of controversy among ARC workers. There will even be those who will praise him for what he came up with. Only next time our character will have to warn him in advance if he comes up with something like that. The guy understood what the instructor wanted from him. Only the leader of the gang of saboteurs had one question for Grossman. Now, if the guys had already fought with dragons, then he would not have had any questions about the cost of airboards, since they were given the task of winning at any cost. The question that interested the main character was whether this was not their main goal. From what he heard, the instructor broke out in a cold sweat, since the guy was completely right. Having quickly taken control of himself, Grossman quickly played a laugh and changed the subject, saying that the young man was very similar to his good friend. He catches him in the same way as Lehan just did. So that the student would not ask the teacher any more questions, he walked away from the conversation, saying that the guy was reasoning correctly, and that it would be interesting for him to watch him and his group on the battlefield. Grossman released Lehan. He said everything he needed to say. Coming out of the teacher's office, the main character ran into Kato. The head of the 7th squad naturally was not happy to see his rival. Now he hated him even more than before, since in the last battle, Sueki's pride was knocked down by a burning airboard. As the head of the 7th division, he did not try to resist Lehan. He was much weaker in tactics and strategy. The main character turned out to be much smarter and more savvy. It didn't take long for Lehan to defeat his opponents. The only one who lasted a little longer than the others from the 7th squad was its head. But he was not in action for long. Our character quickly threw him off the board. Kato was annoyed that he had been defeated, and naturally he was not going to accept the enemy's strategy as ideal. Lehan realized that the head of the 7th squad had been standing at the door all the time and listening to his conversation with the instructor. Out of anger, Kato shouted that he would finish off the main character at any cost. In words, he was ready to kill him, but in battles he turned out to be very weak in comparison with our character. As the sun began to set, the 13th detachment gathered in full force. The guys happily greeted their leader. They had already set the table and were waiting for him. The leader of the gang of saboteurs was also glad to see his friends. The guys couldn't believe that they had won again. True, the guys were afraid that they might be disqualified for violating the rules. Although theoretically they did not violate anything, it was still scary. Jose kept glancing at his bracelet, as if he was waiting for a message from someone. Kuro wondered what happened that his friend was so concerned. To which I received the answer that it was nothing, just that every time they celebrate a victory, something happens. As soon as Batista finished speaking, the bracelet received confirmation of his words. Other team members also began to look at their bracelets. None of them expected to see such a message. They received a schedule for the next battles, and the one they had to fight with was the 5th detachment led by Dmitri. Their battle was the capture of the ensign. The 5th group was the strongest contenders in such a battle, and putting them immediately into another battle without giving them time to rest and prepare seemed like a crazy decision. This was in Grossman's style. For Lehan, the small number of days given for rest was no longer a surprise. Dmitri happily returned from the gym to his room. The guy was hot after the workout he did in the gym. The Tiger Cub's gaze focused on the guy who was heading towards him. The student whom Dima had just missed seemed very familiar to him. Passing by him, Dmitri remembered who he had just seen. The guy quickly hurried to catch up with him. That young man was the former leader of his squad, after whose transfer to the next course, Dima became the leader. The Tiger Cub grabbed the senior student by the shoulder and said that everything was fine with their squad since they chose him as the leader. As soon as the guy with purple hair turned to the Russian, he immediately changed his face. The 3rd year ordered him not to touch it, otherwise he would kill him. The appearance of the senior student was truly frightening. Only this didn't stop Dmitri in any way, but on the contrary. He became interested in what they did to the guy to make him become like this. The Tiger Cub was eager to find out more. He wanted to fight him as quickly as possible. Lehan met the stranger again on the battlefield. The unknown amazed everyone with his super strength. No one could do this in the 2nd year. The main character was haunted by thoughts about who it could be and who he even was. The stranger had incredible strength. Even for our character, he was very strong. What was most interesting was that the opponent was constantly wearing a mask. This is not the first time the orphan has met him. The speed with which the unknown person moved was amazing. The guy in the mask disappeared before the eyes of the main character in a matter of seconds. Lehan was inferior to this opponent in strength and speed. For the first time on the battlefield, our character did not know what to do so that his team would receive the least damage. 6 days before the competition with the 5th squad, the instructor called Lehan and told him very unpleasant news. Unfortunately, Grossman could not give all the details. He could only confirm that what he said was true. The instructor reported that the head of the 5th detachment was injured. Dmitri was beaten by a senior student who had been promoted to 3rd year a few weeks ago. They knew each other since for some time the 3rd year student was his leader in the squad. Despite the fact that the Tiger Cub was seriously injured and was in the hospital, his team was preparing for training. The team leader's sick leave is not a reason to cancel the battle, so no matter what, the battle between the squads will take place. Lehan thought that without Dmitri, his team would be like a bird without a head. The guy was now counting on a quick victory. Grossman had another reason why he called the head of the 13th squad. It turns out that there were already people who wanted to transfer to his group from other units. The main character became famous due to his ability to see and use the strengths of the students. Some fighters from the 7th squad began to speak poorly of Kato. This was to be expected after our character left their group. Most sophomores want to compete on equal terms. which is why they ask for a transfer. Despite the fact that Lehan had time to think about whether to take someone or not, the young man immediately replied that he would take all those who wanted, since he believed that he was in no position to choose. The main character met with his new fighters and happily welcomed them to the 13th detachment. The guys who joined him in the group were Domingo, Kwasim, and Andy. The 4th sophomore was John Kinjo. They all already knew each other since they were together in the 7th detachment. Our character decided to first look at the strength of the newcomers, so that the next day they could begin full training. He also needs to know what these guys are capable of in order to know what positions to put them in. Suddenly, the head of the detachment was approached. Moreover, with a request that he definitely did not expect to hear. The student who called our character was young Kinjo. He was also Korean. The young man asked Lehan to take care of him as was customary to do in their country. The main character did not like this, since there were no nationalities in the ARC. Everyone was equal. If he wants to be taken care of, he must prove himself and show what he is capable of, and not just ask for something like that. Since Chan began to ask the leader to take care of him again, the head of the squad quickly removed him from training that day. Leaving the field, the Korean swore. He did not expect such a reaction. The newcomers were interested in what the guy said when he left. Most of all, he swore at their opinion. Just before the start of the battle between the 5th and 13th squads, the roof of the stadium began to close. It was like simulating the night. It seemed to the guys that the instructors were trying to reduce their chances of winning in this way. Lehan asked the team to calm down, as he believed that all fighters were in the same conditions. They just had to wait a while for their eyes to adjust to the darkness. The detachment in this battle was divided into teams. The group under the command of Knut was supposed to go first, and Jose and his fighters would follow them. And Kuro, Kinjo, and our character planned to attack from the flank. The main character was sure that without Dmitri, the 5th squad would be their easiest opponent. Despite this, they must not let their guard down, so the guys must try and win, and not relax. The teams were confident in their abilities. The first two moved into battle. The group led by Lehan followed at speed. Within 5 minutes, the guys worked perfectly. Almost all opponents were defeated. They even thought that victory was already in their pocket. Looking around, the guys noticed that they had killed almost everyone. There was only one person left who was sitting near the flag. That guy was the only one. He just sat near the flag and didn't even move during the entire battle. The guys even thought that he had been silently watching his comrades being beaten all the time and hadn't even tried to do anything to help them. In a sense, they were. The stranger watched the battle until he was left alone from the team, and only noticing the glances in his direction, the young man immediately got up and went to meet his enemies. The speed and force with which the unknown scattered his rivals was amazingly fast. Before Lehan could blink an eye, part of his squad was already defeated. Kuro tried to fight the enemy using telekinesis. Unfortunately, he failed. The opponent threw back the main character and his friend. Our character was surprised by the strength their opponent had. The speed with which the stranger teleported was amazing. They had never seen before that it was possible to move so quickly. Lehan didn't even have time to be surprised by what was happening. The unknown person is already on the other side of the battlefield in an instant. Kinjo had only one question: if they could even get close to him. Chan decided to meet his opponents and inflict at least some damage on him. The guy rushed to attack to catch the enemy. The stranger skillfully dodged and remained unaffected. Kinjo looked up at the enemy flying above him and was upset. The opponent immediately attacked Chan. The guy didn't even have time to put up a block or dodge the attack. Another of the 13th squad was defeated. Now the battle was only between the captains. In the hall, discussions began between the second-year students that for the first time, Lehan's team knocked out the whole team. They wondered who was hiding behind the skull mask. Some people suggested that this was the famous Silence that they had only heard about. Still, all the students came to the same conclusion that this was indeed the most mysterious student of the arc. Simon also heard about Silence. If it really is that mysterious guy, then Lehan will have a hard time fighting him. There were rumors that the guy's nervous system was damaged during training, which is why he couldn't speak. But immediately after that, his other abilities began to develop at an amazing speed, so experiments began to be carried out. The third years were much stronger than the second years, and according to the rules, they could not compete together. Raising his weapon, Silence looked for Lehan, since he was the only one who remained on the battlefield with him. The main character was not far from him. He also took up a weapon, and was figuring out what was best for him to do. Our character didn't yet know who was in front of him, but he wasn't going to play with him. Despite the fact that this was not their first meeting, the head of the 13th squad knew nothing about his opponent. Lehan concentrated on his telekinesis power with all his strength. The main character's eyes lit up with the abilities that needed to be used to win this battle. Having gathered all his strength, our character could not retreat and give up, thereby letting down his team, which trusted him. Only his opponent was not a guy who was much stronger than him in everything, except that he was inferior to him only in a per-day strategy. The time has come for them to compare their strengths and decide who is luckier in this competition. Del Simon watched the fight with curiosity. If there really was silence on the battlefield, then Lehan will not be able to whitewash him, since he is much stronger than any second year. Everyone was wondering what the main character would do in this battle. Our character understood that if he did not block the enemy's attack, he would be finished. But he also cannot lose. We need to come up with something quickly. The head of the squad noticed that the skull was moving at a speed of 15 meters per second, and it was unlikely to be saving energy. So most likely it would move even faster further. But the goal of the competition was not to defeat everyone, including this guy, but to take the flag. If Lehan can stop the enemy from capturing the ensign, then he has won. The main character was going through options in his head on how he could do this. After a few seconds, he already knew how he could do this. You can only beat him while the stranger is using his ability. This could be understood from the blurred space around him. Wait a few seconds and choose the right moment. On the count of 3, the main character has already begun to put the plan into action. Silence did not expect this outcome of the battle. The skull heard about our character's abilities, and from what he saw, his interest in him grew even more. The head of the 13th detachment encountered the enemy, but as the main character expected, in this battle he was defeated. Finding himself on the floor under his opponent's foot, this was exactly what our character was counting on. Everything happened exactly as Lehan had planned. While on the ground, the head of the squad smiled directly into the enemy's mask. With that smile, he misunderstood silence. After all, in fact, the main character should be disappointed that he lost. But for him, it was the other way around. And the moment came when Lehan struck the enemy, precisely at the moment when he did not expect it at all. Skull did not understand what had just happened. He lost understanding for a few seconds. Returning to full attention, the stranger took up his weapon. Now his goal was to find the head of the opposing team. This is exactly what he did as soon as he came to his senses. After the blow that Lehan dealt to the enemy, he woke up within 3 seconds. But this was enough for the main character to get closer to the flag. The 13th squad was defeated. The head of the team had the flag. From what they saw, the second years couldn't believe that Lehan could easily bypass the third year. He was cool to the guys. Some started talking about the need for them to join his detachment. Del Simon was furious. In yet another fight, his enemy showed how skilled he was in all aspects of a fighter. Kuro, having come to his senses after the fight, met the cat and fed the cat. The two-colored cat approached the Japanese as if it were already approaching her old friend. The cat was good. Kuro remembered how there was also a cat living next to his orphanage, and he was very similar to the one that is now in the ARC. The student said out loud that the guy had no friends at that time and no outstanding talents either, and he didn't look like everyone else. But now he had something he was really good at, and he had friends too. Suddenly someone approached him from behind. It was Kinjo, who thought that his teammate was talking to a cat, and he believed that his abilities were definitely cooler than Kuro's. The comrade turned to the Japanese, and this frightened him, since he did not notice when he even approached him. In fact, Chan also had a conversation that he wanted to discuss over the weekend. The question that the Korean wanted to talk about was that their detachment did not yet have a deputy leader. Kenji wanted to take this position and asked Kuro to support him. The cat began to rub against Chan's legs, and this made him very angry, and he drove the animal away from him with a scream and a kick. The Japanese did not like this very much. He shouted and stood up to defend the beast. Since Kinjo wanted to continue his conversation further, but soon interrupted it. Kuro didn't like the way his classmate treated the animal. The guy began to glow and release his abilities. He stopped hiding them. Chan didn't understand what was happening. He didn't even understand what exactly caused this behavior. In order not to fight with the student, Kuro directed his power towards the trash can. The abilities that the Japanese from the trash can possessed made a small scrap. Kinjo finally noticed what the second-year student had just done. Kuro looked furiously at the offender of the animal and threatened him to never do this again, to which he received the answer that he understood, and this would not happen again. Not yet having come to his senses, Kuro ran away, leaving his classmate alone so as not to cause him any further harm. And the cat continued to walk around the hospital grounds in peace. Lehan visited Dmitri to find out about his condition. The tiger cub realized that the main character came into his room for a reason. He became interested in what exactly the guy was about. Our character calmly looked at his comrade without saying anything for several minutes. The guys had assumptions that the Eric was not telling something. When the leader of the gang of saboteurs saw his comrade, everything became clear to him. The young man guessed that the head of the 5th squad was attacked by a third-year student. Dmitri confirmed that the former head of his squad really started beating him for no reason. It turns out that the guys from that course are completely different. More precisely, they are completely different. Almost nothing is said. They are much stronger and psychologically unstable from the second-year students. Dima explained that he didn't even have time to move as he was already unconscious. Lakhanov was the first to see his comrade looking so upset. The Russian tiger cub remembered something else, that the guy was not himself. It seemed that he had gone crazy. Lehan guessed that if he wasn't like this from the beginning, then it was due to his training in the 3rd year. If you think about it, there is almost no equipment for the senior year in the ARC, and it is not at all easy to meet students who study there. The guys knew that moving to the 2nd year was not so difficult. But on the 3rd, it turns out that a real battle awaits them before graduation. The guys became interested in what would happen to them during the transition. One of the inspectors was already checking the new generation suit for fighting the dragon. The man was leaving the building into the territory of the institution. A few meters in front of him ran a cat that Kuro had fed a few minutes ago. Seeing the kitten, the Japanese man was delighted and rushed to him with cries of joy. The orphan was too painful and pathetic to look at how this animal was treated by the other students of the guy. He wanted to give the animal a bunch of other goodies so that there would be at least some kind of bad attitude towards him. Suddenly, the man in the cybersuit scared Kuro too much. Only, unlike a human, a kitten was, on the contrary, interesting and fascinating to examine a superhuman warrior. A familiar voice came from the helmet in which the warrior was located. But the question of who it was did not leave the student. The fighter took off his mask and Kuro saw his instructor in the suit that he was testing. It was Sergeant Red. He greeted his student and admitted that he had changed a lot since he could not immediately recognize him. Kuro moved far away from his body. The place where they met the sergeant was the Arc Development Center. John wondered how the sophomore ended up there. The guys entered the room and decided to drink water. Red needed to take off the suit he was testing. After changing clothes, the sergeant offered to wait and drink a drink while they came for Kuro to take him to the dorm. The student was surprised that the instructor was not angry with him for seeing him with a cat, and even far from the place where he lived. Red did not immediately understand what the student meant, but when it dawned on him, he switched to another topic without saying anything. The sergeant began to talk about the armor he was testing with. This was 2nd generation telearmor and was still at the testing stage. The fact that he saw it a little earlier was nothing bad about it, since they would not leave the Ark. After the reinforcement, the guys could not leave the institution. This could only happen in one case if they completely lost their combat capability. After all, children are just a resource for them. The instructor confirmed that Kuro was completely right. Red also added that especially those who are constantly angry with their character only make it worse because they do not understand it. Kuro at that moment did not understand what Serjan meant and what he was talking about. Into the office where the couple was and asked how the testing went, to which he replied that the armor responded to telekinesis simply excellent. Only the sergeant would reduce the amount of dragon flesh material for the internal system, since it is important to increase its power. But if it is so sensitive, it will be more difficult to control. This had to be done so that, unlike the 1st generation, the guys who are now learning to calibrate their telekinesis will be as easy as taking a breath. Only now the old man noticed that there was also a 2nd-year scientist on Wednesday, who immediately introduced himself as his name was Charles Smith, and he was the head of the first group. Kara and the scientist shook hands and let slip that it was this man who created the armor and was considered a legend in the Ark. Mr. Smith said that the 1st generation Tillim armor was assembled in a hurry and had certain shortcomings, but the 2nd generation is much better and will certainly be the most advanced weapon. John Red confirmed that it was created specifically for children, and it is very difficult for him to control it. Understood that soon he would have to put on the suit in which he saw the sergeant. A monster and a dinosaur with which he would have to fight in the near future immediately flashed before the Japanese's eyes. Hooray! It was all scary to even imagine, let alone being on a real battlefield and participating in a real battle. The men escorted their student and said goodbye to him. As soon as Kuro got into the car and drove away, he asked Smith what would happen now with the armor that he tested today. The scientists said that they were taking it apart and working with each one separately. They didn't have much of the dragon's materials. Sergeant Red asked to hold on to the armor sample for now, since it is unknown to whom and at what moment it might be needed. The day in ARC begins at 5 a.m., but the main character gets up at 4. He needs this time in order to write down strategies for battles, outstanding traits of a squad member, or other features. Of course, Lehan always writes down and evaluates his abilities along with others. Our character's telekinesis is still below average. In other words, there is almost no benefit from it. He cannot even use the absolute ability of telekinesis that Instructor Wei told him about. But still, the guy managed to discover an ability that only he possessed as a sophomore. It was absolute precision when using telekinesis. Kuro and Simon are able to use it to turn a pencil into a powerful weapon, but they cannot write with it. When it comes to control, Lehan is superior to other students, and he needs to practice a lot more to improve his accuracy. The time for self-control passes very quickly, and it's time to go to class. The first on the schedule in the ARC is a morning jog. They all run around the stadium together. Each detachment runs in its own group. Only this time the 2 squads were running on adjacent paths. That morning, the 5th detachment, led by Dmitri, caught up with the 13th detachment. Seeing his comrade, Lehan asked him how he liked yesterday's spatial crack. The tiger cub, as always, answered with humor and said that in general it was nothing special, only it was very bright, but for a date it would be exactly what was needed. The spatial crack is a trace left after the Battle of the Dragon Troops and the closing of the gate. By order of Grossman, the second-year students were divided into 2 groups and sent to examine it. This was the place where the Earth and another world intersected. It was believed that it was because of them that people with telekinetic abilities appeared in the human world. The instructor believed that it would be useful for the students to see the crack since it does not pose a danger, so they should not worry. The crack formed more than 10 years ago, and until that time had not shown any activity. Lehan heard from someone that telekinetics experience strange sensations when approaching a crack. Dmitri confirmed that he begins to feel slightly dizzy. But what is happening is very difficult to describe. You need to feel it and see it for yourself. The head of the 5th detachment became bored with running along with everyone else. So he rushed forward with shouts of pressure and left behind his detachment, which could barely keep up with him anyway. The first training session of the morning had ended, and the squads were now heading to their personal training sessions. Lehan gathered his fighters and announced that after breakfast and a shower they had free time, so they could decide for themselves how to occupy themselves. But at 10 in the morning, they gather at the helipad. The place where they were going reminded Jose of a school trip. Having let his guys go, the main character wanted to mind his own business. At the same moment, Lehan was called by a second-year student. The guy suggested having breakfast together. This guy was John, the head of the 10th squad. The young man was pleased that the main character remembered who he was. After defeating Silence, the instructor did not want the 13th squad to lose to anyone. But still, several teams were able to defeat them, and the 10th detachment was one of the few who were able to do this. Our character was always interested in the strategies of other leaders, so he didn't mind chatting with his opponent. The morning quickly ended and helicopters flew over the students of the ARC to send students to the crack on an excursion. After boarding the planes, the sophomores were sent to their destination. The instructor announced that they were heading to Sinija, one of the places that opened due to the dimensional gate during the first invasion. The dragons that were there split up and went to North Korea and China. The North Korean government was dismantled and citizens began crossing the demilitarized zone. The Republic of Korea accepted refugees and at the same time defended itself from attackers. The country is still in crisis. Domingo looked at his leader and guessed that if they were flying to the Republic of Korea, then most of all this was the homeland of Lehan. The main character confirmed that both he and John Kinjo were born there. The helicopters had landed and were looking for a place to land. Having arrived in Senju, the instructor gathered them all and announced the rules. When they approached the crack, they opened the rear hatches for the students, near which they were already standing and waiting for the commander's command. A strong stream of wind that came from the crack hit the students. It was difficult for the guys to resist such pressure. The helicopters circled right through the crack from which a bright light emanated. The pressure that came from their abyss was very strong. It seemed to our character that it could devour them at any moment. A few minutes later, the helicopters turned around and flew towards the ARC. The inspection of the crack was completed. The guys sat on board and talked about how tired they were without doing anything. The feelings were disgusting. Everyone wanted to return to the base, take a shower, and go to bed. Lehan looked out the window and examined everything that caught his eye. This was the territory of his country. Since not only their squad was flying, their fellow students were also in other helicopters. The main character looked at the same plane and thought that the 10th squad must be there, and they fly close to each other. John saw Lehan. The guys got to know each other at breakfast and they had something to talk about. The main character realized that the head of the 10th squad turned out to be a good guy who did not pursue fame, but was sincere and respected his friends. Suddenly, one of the helicopters was hit by lightning from a crack. The flash and sound of the hit illuminated everyone. It was impossible not to notice what had happened. In a matter of seconds, the plane exploded in the air. It was unknown whether one or more helicopters were damaged. Our character looked alarmed. He did not immediately understand what had happened. It was not clear what the light was or where it came from. But immediately the main character realized that the 10th squad was no more, and he just met John this morning. Finally, the instructor was able to reach Lehan. An emergency occurred and everyone urgently needed to get off board. The helicopter was on fire, and they had only minutes to save it before it exploded. The main character quickly concentrated and ran to his comrades. Everyone immediately began to jump overboard to escape. Only the leader and the instructor remained, who gave instructions on what to do as soon as they immediately descended to the ground. Our character had to immediately, as soon as land, assemble a squad and wait until the next plane arrived for them. If the chief instructor does not come, then Lehan will have to take command. The pressure of the crack on the helicopter increased, and it began to burn more intensely. The leader of the squad was the last to jump off board. Immediately after that, the helicopter exploded and the explosion threw the main character further. Our character opened his parachute and descended to the ground. Lehan still had an explosion in front of his eyes, in which the body of their instructor was burning. who did not have time to escape. What he saw did not let go of the main character for some time, but our character understood that he needed to pull himself together and concentrate. For this, all ARC students trained long and hard. Someone may have been injured and is panicking. He needs to find guys urgently. The main character decided to follow the smoke and fire. There must be helicopter noises, or maybe Kuro will give him some kind of signal. Our character took out a knife to free himself from the parachute and help him on the hike. Lehan sank to the ground. He needed to quickly move out. The guy immediately went into the fire and smoke, as he had thought at first. The main character heard a rustling in the bushes, and immediately concentrated, so that if it was an enemy, he could neutralize him. It was Chon Kinjo who, like our character, was on a helicopter that had just exploded. The guy admitted that he had been watching the plane since he jumped off. He immediately realized that the leader would be the last to leave the board. Therefore, after the explosion, the young man went in search of the commander, as it should be in such situations. Lehan ordered to go and look for the others. The head of the detachment noted to himself that despite the emergency situation, the student correctly found solutions to how to act in such extreme conditions. Along the way, the guys broke branches, so they left a trail behind them. Even if they got lost, they would understand from the broken branches whether they were there or not. Very quickly, the young men found a burning helicopter. They sent it to it to see what was going on there better. The main character realized that there should have been a second team on this board, which was the 8th squad. The guys immediately rushed to open the helicopter to check if someone was still alive and in need of help. The comrades understood that they could be in their place. What Kinjo saw made him feel bad. He ran to throw away all the food he had eaten for breakfast. Then I looked at the head of the detachment and thought that he was probably made of steel, because there was no reaction to what he saw. This was not the first time Lehan had seen a corpse in the ARC, so he took it for granted. They needed to hurry to quickly find their comrades. Suddenly, with a flame that spread to the trees, a huge werewolf appeared. The main character ordered Kinjo to return to the helicopter and look for some kind of weapon there, and he himself would do something to distract the creature. Only the red-haired guy suggested running away rather than fighting. Ours understood that if they turned their backs on him, he would immediately end them, since he was much faster than them. Lehan tried to hold the creature's attention, but he wasn't very good at it. He urgently needed help from a comrade, and preferably with a weapon. Kinjo, despite the fact that he wanted to escape, rushed to carry out the leader's order and hurried to his aid. It was difficult for Red to find the strength not to turn and run into the depths of the forest. He was not mentally prepared for such a battle. Lehan did his best to stop the werewolf. Having escaped from the trap, the main character was satisfied, and now they both needed to get inside the monster, so they could inflict severe damage on it. The werewolf rose to his height and began to emit a strong aura. It was difficult for our character to resist such a strong opponent. Kinjo reached the werewolf. He stood and did not know what to do next. Now he had the perfect opportunity to escape while the creature was occupied by the leader. He was afraid of battle. Quickly come to his senses, Chan realized that he was not a coward and could not set up his comrade like that. The guy rushed as fast as he could to help his partner. The werewolf was strong against Lehan, who had no developed abilities. The red-haired guy tried to find at least some weapons and shells. The main character witnessed how the monster began to regenerate. Our character began to have thoughts that he would not be able to cope with him. The creature was many times larger and stronger than Lehan. Finally, Kinjo found a weapon and was able to help his comrade. Red apologized to the leader for being late and immediately started fighting with the monster. Unlike Lehan, he had developed the ability of telekinesis, which helped them in the battle. Kinjo hoped that the leader would understand his idea and react to it immediately. Red believed in the abilities of the main character. It was not for nothing that he joined his squad. The werewolf left Lehan behind and turned his attention to a new target. The monster quickly knocked the student to the ground and was about to drain all the life energy from him. They prevented him from doing this. Kinjo saw that the creature was pierced by a knife, which he threw to Lehan. The head of the detachment did not let his fighter down. He correctly understood the message he made. Still, for some time, Kinjo could not believe that a monster was no longer alive on him. Lehan extended a helping hand and confirmed that they had won. The leader praised the student. He behaved with dignity in battle. ARC will definitely send help, so they need to continue searching for other students. The fighters of the 13th detachment knew that if they lit a fire, their leader would definitely see it and come to them. Kuro and Jose were confident in Lehan. He never let them down and always made the right decisions. Students from other groups were surprised how much the guys trusted their leader. Having analyzed how they won in training, they immediately realized that it was deserved. Kuro heard someone approaching them. It was the 9th detachment that also suffered. Knut assumed that since there were 6 of them left, their plane also crashed. But it turned out that the 9th squad was attacked. Their instructor and leader died, but the rest were able to escape. Kinjo were already approaching them, and they heard the story of the attack. The main character suggested that those guys saw a werewolf. Hearing a familiar voice, Everyone turned to him and saw his comrades approaching them.